The story begins with the Bellamont family, known as the most prestigious noble family in the empire, famously dubbed the Iron-Blooded Duchy. Despite the magnificence of the ducal palace, a thunderous cry pierced its silence, for the palace was never free from turmoil and noise. The young red-haired lady, Lucilla Lil Fry, wonders in amazement at the cause of this chaos. The reason for all of this was her dearly beloved nephew, Lucian, who was sitting amidst the mess before turning to her with a bright smile. The heir to the duchy, Lucian Bellamont, ran toward her, asking why she was so late in coming. Lucilla looked around at the utter chaos, then firmly asked Lucian if he was the one who did it, while the little one clung to her leg. She resolved within herself that this situation could not be tolerated, and that she must scold him properly this time. But before she could begin her reprimand, Lucian beat her to it by calling her auntie, expressing how much he had missed her, and then innocently asked if she had missed him too. In the face of this, her resolve melted. She embraced him tenderly, told him she missed him too, and even began apologizing for being late. Suddenly, Lucilla realized that she was the one apologizing now, and she almost overlooked the whole matter if she hadn't regained her senses at the last moment. She cast her memory back to what Lucian had done, noticing that the entire room was covered in flour. Lucian cheerfully told her that playing with dough is very fun, and invited her to try it with him. Here, Lucilla realized he hadn't stopped there but had also sprayed water, which explained why the floor was slippery. The little one asked her to put him down for a moment because he wanted to show her something, how he could make bird footprints using his palm. Lucilla wondered about the whereabouts of his nanny and the servants, only to spot them later looking utterly exhausted, as if the energy of a small child had completely drained their souls. Lucian increased his excitement and suggested they all play with the dough together, sparking panic in both Lucilla and the servants alike. To prevent Lucian from becoming more disliked by the servants, she decided to take him outside first. She suggested instead that they go out to play together, but as she bent down to speak to him, her foot slipped on the wet, flour-covered floor, causing her to suddenly lose her balance. Two servants rushed toward her in panic, shock written all over their faces, hurrying to try and carry her to bed. But Lucilla was lying on the floor laughing, and Lucian joined her in loud laughter, considering the sight of her fall very funny and calling her clumsy. She looked at him laughing, wondering to herself about this little troublemaker, and how she would be able to raise him well. Her memory goes back 12 years, when she was the second daughter of the Lil Fry family, living in peace with her family. But that peace did not last long. It was shattered in a single moment after the sudden death of her parents in a tragic carriage accident. After this tragedy, her uncle took advantage of the situation and seized the family title he had long coveted. Not content with that, he forced her older sister, the rightful heir, to marry the Duke of Bellamont. The marriage was not happy, as the Duke already had another lover, causing her sister to suffer in a cold and loveless marriage in that duchy. In the midst of her suffering, her sister was worried about leaving Lucilla alone with their uncle, so she decided to make one last request to the Duke. She asked him to bring her sister Lucilla to live with her in the Duke's palace, and the Duke coldly agreed, telling her to do as she pleased. Her sister was overwhelmed with happiness and thanked him profusely for his consent. However, his approval was conditional. He added, asking her not to interfere in his affairs or care about whom he met from then on. For her sister's sake, she accepted that painful condition, and thus Lucilla moved to live in the Duke's house. Lucilla remembers meeting her sister, who happily told her they would rely on each other and live together. But Lucilla at that time did not realize anything about the reality of what had happened. After a few years, her sister gave birth to her nephew, Lucian, a child so precious she saw him as an invaluable treasure. In those happy days, Lucilla would sit beside her sister as she held baby Lucian, and she was filled with joy when the little one grabbed her hand. Her sister affectionately remarked that Lucian seemed to love his aunt, but just as their small family began to find its way toward happiness again, tragedy struck. Her sister was afflicted with a sudden terminal illness. In her final days, the sister asked Lucilla for one last request, to stay by Lucian's side and protect him, sorrowfully apologizing for leaving them. With those words, her sister passed away, and a grand funeral was held for her in the ducal palace. Lucilla was supposed to return to her family home after the funeral, but she found herself anxiously searching for little Lucian in the palace corridors. She found him in a secluded hallway, clutching a doll that resembled his mother, and silently trying to hold back his tears. The child looked at her with tearful eyes and innocently and fearfully asked if she too would leave him and go away. At the sight of Lucian crying quietly in a corner, her feet would not let her leave. She realized that if she departed, he would be completely alone in this world. Ultimately, she made the decision to stay at the ducal residence. As for the Duke, who was always indifferent to his son, he treated her as nothing more than a nanny and gave her no attention, which allowed her to stay by Lucian's side all this time. Events returned to the present, where Lucilla was losing consciousness after tripping on the floor, and in those moments, a strange feeling of doubt overcame her. In the depths of unconsciousness, she addressed her sister's soul in sorrow, apologizing for her failure to raise Lucian properly. Because of his hurtful behavior, people around him began to avoid him, and even when she fell, he did nothing but laugh like a villain. Suddenly, the phrase "villain Lucian" sparked a feeling in her mind that she had seen this story somewhere before. At that moment, she remembered her past life and a novel she had read titled "From an Illegitimate Child to the Head of the Family." She realized the shocking truth: this world is nothing but a stage for the events of that romantic fantasy novel. The protagonist of the novel was Edwin Bellamont, the illegitimate son of the Duke of Bellamont, who, thanks to his exceptional abilities, managed to become the head of the family despite his origins. As for the motive behind his burning desire to reach the top, it was the oppression he faced since childhood at the hands of his half-brother, who was the absolute villain of the story. And this villain, who mocked the hero and asked him if he had finally found his place, was none other than Lucian Bellamont. That person was her nephew, who grew up burdened with psychological scars due to the Duke's neglect. While torturing Edwin, who eventually stole the position of heir from him, he gradually turned into the world's worst villain. Ultimately, his obsession and hatred for losing what was his led him to ruin, where he met a gruesome death at the hands of the story's hero. Lucilla was shocked by this truth, wondering how Lucian could be the future villain destined to die in the end. She regained consciousness to find the servants around her, relief clear on their faces, asking if she felt better. She felt a slight pain and remembered she had lost consciousness, realizing that what happened was not a dream. She found it difficult to accept the idea that this world was the world of a novel in which she was reincarnated as a minor character. But the thought that Lucian, her beloved nephew, would one day become a villainous mastermind and die a hideous death at the hero's hands was a deeply despairing reality. One of the servants interrupted her dark thoughts to draw her attention to the young master. The servant told her that Lucian had stayed by her side the entire time until she woke up, and there he was, standing before her anxiously clutching his doll. Lucian approached her, apologizing sincerely, insisting he never meant to hurt her. He explained that he was enjoying playing with the flower and wanted to share the fun with her, then asked with genuine concern if she was okay and if she was still in pain. Faced with the child's innocence and sincere love, Lucilla reached out and hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. Little Lucian noticed his aunt's concern and asked if she was in a lot of pain, then tenderly patted her hair, pleading with her not to be hurt. In those moments, Lucilla vowed in her heart to her late sister that she would keep her promise to protect Lucian, asserting that she would never allow her beloved nephew to die, and asked her to watch over her. She resolved that she would raise Lucian to be a good child, and that she would change his future, which was destined for him to become the worst villain. Lucian, the troublemaker in the house of the Duke of Bellamont, was known that despite his cute and beautiful appearance, he earned this title because of his exaggerated pranks that he would laugh at happily. Among his achievements were scribbling on the servants' clothes and breaking expensive antiques, causing them to cry. It could be gently said that he grew up healthy, even in the absence of his mother. One day, Lucian called his aunt and asked her to hold out her hand, so she wondered playfully what he had in store for her. But he placed an insect in her hand, making her scream in horror. If there were no one to watch and guide him, he would have grown up wrongly and taken the bad path as in the original story. As is the case in reality, the Duke in the novel was not interested in Lucian at all, so the only guardian over him was his aunt, Lucilla. However, the original Lucilla in the novel could not bear the contempt of living at the duchy's expense, in addition to the burden of raising her immature nephew. So she ended up leaving the palace as if fleeing, and thus, in a world where there is no one to rely on, and after Lucian realized that the only person on his side had abandoned him, Lucian saw his aunt leaving, pleading with her not to leave him behind. From that moment on, his personality became increasingly twisted and deviant. Lucilla sat with Lucian, having decided in her heart that she was different from the original Lucilla. She vows that she will raise Lucian properly so he does not become a villain, but she admitted to herself anxiously that she didn't know enough about childcare. While Lucian was calling her, while she was thinking about how to fix his personality, he called her again insistently. She finally drank from the tea he offered her, only to find it extremely salty, so he shouted happily that she finally drank it. He proudly showed her the salt bowl, explaining that he expected his salt tea would amaze her, and that he could now defeat villains with this weapon. Lucilla realized, with astonishment, that he had secretly put salt in the tea as an experiment. Lucian asked her with sparkling eyes if he had prepared it well, expecting praise. Lucilla thought that normally she would have given in to his cute face and praised him, but this time she answered with a firm word. No, she sternly told him that this was not proper behavior, and that from now on he must learn manners and sound ethics. She decided she must be firm and say no when something is wrong. He was surprised and asked her why. She reminded him of her fall the previous day because of him. She explained to him that he cannot bully others just for fun, but he stubbornly replied that he didn't care as long as he was enjoying himself. She asked him, if he were upset and she was laughing beside him, would that be fun? After a short thought, he answered no. She concluded that he should not bother others anymore, but he hesitated, saying he loves fun. She realized it wouldn't be easy, so she asked him to come closer. She hugged him and encouraged him to endure a little, affirming her belief that he could do it and that things would change with continued effort. Lucian looked at her surprised and asked if she really believed in him. And when she saw her determination, he answered enthusiastically that he would try to endure even if it was difficult. Lucilla was filled with joy as she hugged Lucian tearfully, proudly praising him for his right decision, affirming to herself that her child could grow up to be kind too. But on that day, she did not know that her resolve would not last for a single day. The next day, a shout of Lucian's name echoed throughout the palace. Lucilla rushed into one of the rooms searching for him, wondering aloud if he was inside and asking him to come out immediately. Lucian appeared calmly and innocently asked if she had returned, which left her in a state of shock that silenced her tongue. He pointed to something on the floor, then proudly presented himself, asking her what she thought of his new look and if it suited him. For a moment, her anger melted before his cuteness, believing in secret that Lucian looks wonderful in anything he wears. But she soon regained her senses and scolded him, reminding him of the conversation they had shortly before and how he had returned to cause trouble again, while he merely turned his face away with indifference. The chaos outside was due to him cutting Baron Chernon's precious beard without permission. When his aunt confronted him with her knowledge of how much the Baron cherished his beard, he simply replied that he only wanted to make it look more elegant. Lucilla felt exhausted and put her hand on her head, pleading with him to stop his actions. She remembered that Lucian, after his mother's departure, had developed a strong sense of possessiveness and that what he craved most was attention and love. She realized that if she wasn't careful, he might go further in his actions just to catch her attention. It occurred to her that if he had the opportunity to see children his age and interact with them, it might help guide him. Here, an idea flashed in her mind. She remembered the original hero of the novel and realized she had a way to solve this problem. She firmly told Lucian that there would be no play today and that he had to think about what he did. He tried to object, but she insisted on her decision. When she told him she was going out for a moment, he asked anxiously if she was angry with him, so she reassured him that she wasn't. She explained that she was going to do something important for him. She ordered him not to cause trouble and to think about his mistake, so he asked anxiously when she would return. She answered that she would return around evening, so anxiety about her absence took hold of him. He agreed with a sigh but asked her to return quickly. Her carriage set off, and its destination was the orphanage where the original hero of the story, Edwin, resided. Edwin had lost his mother at an early age and lived a miserable childhood moving between orphanages. The carriage arrived at the Fosner orphanage. Lucilla stepped out, thinking that, according to her memory, Edwin must be here now. Her plan was twofold: to leave a good impression on the hero to pave the way for Lucian's future, and at the same time learn proper parenting methods by observing other children. Inside, the arrival of her luxury carriage sparked the curiosity of the children who peered from the windows, fascinated that the visitor must be a noble. One of them wondered if someone was going to be adopted today, while silver-haired Edwin with red eyes looked on, wondering about the identity of that mysterious visitor. Lucilla visited the orphanage with high expectations, hoping to achieve her plan, and was welcomed by the official there. But as soon as she stepped inside, she was shocked by what she saw. The place was extremely dirty, even by the standards of remote rural orphanages. She saw a rat running on the floor and was overcome with disgust at the idea of leaving children to grow up in such an environment. Her soul was filled with sorrow seeing children wearing tattered clothes and cleaning dirty floors, wondering how such a place could be a facility dedicated to children. Lucilla questioned why the children were doing the cleaning work in the orphanage. The official answered with a forced smile, claiming that the children insist on cleaning themselves even if told not to, and wondered if that wasn't impressive. As the official led her to meet the orphanage director, Lucilla clearly realized it was a blatant lie, and that she was beginning to understand how this facility was truly run. The director welcomed her, a man who appeared wealthy, apologizing for not having prepared the children properly for her sudden visit, which sparked Lucilla's anger as she noticed their neglect of the children while they themselves lived in luxury. The director rudely asked her if she preferred a certain appearance in a child, but she answered with a fake smile that she would take a look first. barely controlling her anger. His question provoked her intense anger. She wondered to herself how he dared to talk about children as if they were mere decorations to be selected based on appearance, but she tried to restrain herself. During her tour, she spotted a child hiding in a corner, and his features stopped her for a moment. He had silver hair like moonlight and red eyes peering from behind his long bangs. She had no doubt that this child was Edwin, the original hero of the novel. His identity was confirmed as Edwin Bellamont, the hero of the novel From an Illegitimate Child to the Head of the Family. As the novel's title suggests, he was born as the illegitimate son of Duke de Hart Bellamont from his mother Iris, who was a commoner. His mother Iris had continued her relationship with the Duke even after his marriage, and during that time she discovered she was carrying his child. Iris felt sorry for the fate that awaited her child as an illegitimate son, and for her life as the Duke's mistress. She could no longer bear it and left without revealing her pregnancy to the Duke. 4 years later, Iris died of tuberculosis, leaving little Edwin alone. Edwin found no other place to go, so he was eventually sent to the orphanage. Lucilla returned to reality, confirming his presence there to herself, since his conflicts with Lucian begin several years later when he comes to the Duke's palace. She realized that if she could build a good relationship with him in advance, it would be beneficial. But Edwin was frightened by her gaze and ran away, so she blamed herself, thinking she should have approached him more quietly. The director returned to ask her if there was a child she liked. She told him that before making an adoption decision, she would like to spend some time getting to know the children. The director agreed welcomingly, noting they had many beautiful children, which sparked her anger again because she felt he was talking about them as if they were merchandise. She then suggested having a meal with the children, a suggestion that surprised the director. She added that she didn't mind the type of food, and they could serve it as usual, and clear hesitation appeared on him. She cleverly hinted that if it bothered him, she could simply leave and didn't know when she would return. Again, which pushed him to agree immediately in a state of panic. She told him with a smile that in the meantime she would go play with the children, leaving him and the official in a state of tension and anxiety. When mealtime arrived, Lucilla sat in the crowded dining hall, but her features changed to shock at what she saw, realizing the situation there surpassed reasonable limits. She noticed that the toys available to the children broke at the slightest touch. Dolls were contaminated with rat urine, and the few intact blocks didn't match at the corners at all. Lucilla was filled with intense anger at this absurdity and complete disregard for children's lives. It didn't stop there. She noticed another problem during food service: the great and unjust disparity in the quality of clothing and the amount of food provided to the children. She wondered bitterly if the orphanage management only cared about children who had a good appearance and better chances of adoption, while leaving others in tattered clothes. Faced with this tragic scene, she found herself at a loss. She had originally come to find Edwin, but her conscience wouldn't allow her to leave the rest of the children to face this dark fate alone. A blonde-haired girl caught Lucilla off guard with a sudden question about whether they looked pathetic in her eyes, making Lucilla look at her in surprise. The girl continued her talk, justifying it by their presence in this place they didn't choose to come to of their own will. But despite that, she asked Lucilla with a serious and more mature gaze not to pity them easily. Lucilla expressed her inner admiration for the child's maturity and apologized to her, explaining that she never meant any offense. At that moment, Lucilla stopped thinking when she remembered something important, wondering to herself if there was another protagonist of the original story living. In the same orphanage as Edwin, Lucilla took the initiative to ask the girl her name with a kind smile, while the girl remained silent for moments. The girl answered that her name was Amelia, which made Lucilla freeze in place from sheer shock as she realized this child's identity. The girl was Amelia Agrees, the original heroine of the story and the sole rightful heir to the prestigious Marquis Agrees family. Lucilla remembered that Amelia is the other protagonist of the novel From an Illegitimate Child to the Head of the Family. As the only daughter of the Agrees family, Amelia grew up surrounded by the love and care of her parents in an environment full of happiness. She lived a happy and ideal life until that ill-fated day arrived. One rainy day, while Amelia was traveling with her parents in a carriage, the bodies of the Marquis and his wife were found. The Marquis and his wife lost their lives in a tragic accident, while voices searching for the young lady Amelia echoed everywhere without finding any trace of her among the blood-stained wreckage of the carriage. Unlike her parents whose bodies were found, Amelia completely disappeared and was reported missing, as the shock of the shooting led to her temporary memory loss regarding the accident. She ended up homeless until she reached this miserable orphanage, where someone picked her up from the mountains thinking she might be of use. Even after recovering from her injuries, Amelia did not return to the Marquis family. She realized that if she returned, there would be greedy vultures waiting to exploit her situation, so she chose instead to wait for the only person she trusted most, her uncle. Thanks to her strong yet kind nature, Amelia took Edwin and the rest of the children under her wing and spent her days in the orphanage waiting for the right time. Lucilla thought about the massive impact Amelia would have on the events of the original story and realized that sitting next to her now represented a great and irreplaceable opportunity. Since Amelia was destined to stand as an obstacle against Lucian in the future, Lucilla asked her with a smile about her age. Amelia answered while eating her soup that she was 7 years old, so Lucilla understood. Lucilla concluded that about 2 years had passed since the accident that happened to the Marquis family, and told Amelia she thought she was the same age as her nephew, but she was actually a year older. Lucilla placed a piece of meat on Amelia's plate, hoping that leaving a good impression and earning some points with her now might make her show some mercy toward Lucian in the future for her sake. Amelia looked at Lucilla intently with the meat in her mouth, then asked her if she liked her for some reason, which raised Lucilla's surprise at her offensive reaction. Amelia shot Lucilla a sharp look and warned her that her father was a killer, and that he didn't just kill 1 or 2 people, but wiped out many. Amelia continued her attempt to scare Lucilla with a feigned, terrifying look, advising her to be careful of her and reminding her of the saying that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Confusion hit Lucilla, and she wondered in secret why Amelia would invent such a lie about her father and describe him as a killer. Lucilla quickly realized that Amelia was trying to drive her away for fear of being adopted. She strongly believes her uncle will come to take her, and therefore deliberately hides her true identity from the orphanage and other nobles. The only person who firmly believed she was still alive was her uncle. Claude agrees. After scouring the entire country looking for her, Claude would finally reunite with his niece about a year from now. Lucilla looked sadly at Amelia, eating her modest food, wondering in heartbreak if this child had been living all this time belittling herself and hiding behind these lies and pushing others away until her uncle came to save her. Lucilla's heart broke with sorrow for the girl, wondering in her soul about the cruelty of the circumstances that force a child of this young age to resort to inventing such lies just to protect herself. Lucilla gently held Amelia's spoon to stop her from eating and asked her to listen carefully, explaining to her in a tender way that just because her parents were criminals, as she claimed, it never meant she was doomed to become a criminal herself. Lucilla smiled sincerely, affirming to the girl that regardless of the nature of the parents who raised her, she would always retain her essence and purity, making Amelia stop eating and look at her in astonishment. After that, Lucilla offered some fresh bread to the children, noting that they must be hungry and asking them to share it together. The children cheered and thanked her gratefully. Amelia sat silently, lost in her thoughts, remembering that people usually frown at her and avoid her completely as soon as she tells them that story about her parents. Amelia eyed Lucilla with looks full of wonder, thinking that this lady who volunteers to eat with them in this miserable place is truly a strange character. Later, Lucilla sat in the orphanage director's room, who asked her if there was a specific child she liked. She answered evasively that all the children are as precious as angels, making the choice very difficult. The director laughed, believing she hadn't made her decision yet, and suggested with a greedy smile that she provide a financial donation for the children for now until she made up her mind. The director added that her donation would be a massive help for childcare, while Lucilla shot him sharp, silent looks, listening to his hypocritical words. Lucilla contemplated the details of the luxurious room and compared in secret the dilapidated rooms where the children slept, which were about to collapse, and the director's office decorated with luxurious furniture resembling noble palaces. Thinking that she had only planned to check on the original protagonists and then leave, she decided not to overlook this corruption. She set down her cup and coldly told the director that she actually didn't come here for the purpose of adoption. The director was deeply surprised and broke into a sweat from tension, wondering in confusion why she came to the orphanage then. With coldness and stability, Lucilla invented a lie saying her brother-in-law was very curious about how the orphanage located in the Bellamont province was managed, sparking the director's confusion, who wondered about the identity of the brother-in-law she was talking about. Lucilla stood tall and reintroduced herself officially as Lucilla Lil Fry, claiming she was an inspector affiliated with the Bellamont ducal family and that she was sent to investigate on behalf of her brother-in-law, the Duke himself. Despite her full awareness that she was lying, she remembered the original novel's mention of Edwin's abuse in this place. So she brought with her the forged operational report the director had submitted to the Duke just in case of any emergency, making her trick seem perfectly tight. Lucilla confronted the director with the paper, asking indignantly if this orphanage hadn't been classified as a first-class facility last year. The director jumped in terror and shock. She continued her attack, highlighting the glaring flaws, pointing to the cracked windows that allow freezing drafts of air to enter, and the wooden toys thrown on the floor, which were not just old, but completely destroyed. Lucilla added firmly that after taking a close look at the place, she sees that classifying it even as a fourth-class facility would be an exaggerated and very generous assessment. She followed up by exposing his lies, reminding him that he requested 20 gold pieces last year under the pretext of making building repairs and buying supplies. The director swallowed hard with tension and tried to justify that the winter winds were exceptionally harsh this year, leading to broken windows and the destruction of facilities and supplies inside. Lucilla suddenly stood up from her seat, asking sarcastically if that was truly the case. The director panicked and asked her destination, to which she coldly replied that those supplies include food as well, then headed with confident steps toward the door. Lucilla opened the door, thinking that instead of wasting time questioning him to find the truth, it was faster to see things for herself, and announced she would head to the kitchen. Meanwhile, Amelia was in the kitchen searching through barrels and shelves, complaining about the foul smell of mold filling the place, and affirming to herself that this was the exact reason behind her hatred of entering the kitchen. Amelia contemplated a small piece of biscuit in her hand, hoping she would succeed in bringing some joy to Edwin's heart. Amelia remembered Edwin's sad look and his anxious question about whether that lady would adopt her, and if that meant they would be separated. Amelia completely ruled out the idea of adoption and considered it impossible, taking the biscuit out of a paper bag, believing it might improve his mood a bit. But when she looked closely at the biscuit in her palm, she discovered that rats had nibbled it, so she felt confused and sorry, knowing she couldn't give something like that to Edwin. Suddenly, the sound of the kitchen door opening forcefully boomed. Amelia was startled and rushed to hide inside the pantry, wondering in terror about the identity of the newcomer. Lucilla entered the kitchen, followed by the tense director, and looked around with intense disgust, expressing her shock at the horrific filth she had never seen the likes of in any kitchen before, and denounced them preparing children's food in a place smelling of such a foul and nauseating odor. Amelia watched the situation through the crack of the pantry door, while the director tried to justify the foul smell, suggesting it emanated from food leftovers they forgot to dispose of the previous day. Lucilla approached one of the crates and scolded him severely, asking how he dared to call these ingredients leftovers, while she was looking at a crate full of unpeeled, moldy potatoes that had sprouted roots next to completely rotten tomatoes. The tense director tried to justify the situation, claiming the kitchen staff might have been distracted lately, but Lucilla firmly cut him off, asserting she was tired of his hollow excuses and that she would report everything she saw to the Duke immediately. The director collapsed on his knees, pleading with her to forgive him and retract her decision. Lucilla looked at him coldly, pointing out that his awareness of his mistake and his lack of intention to fix it makes the matter even worse. The director continued his groveling, admitting to committing a great sin and begging her to overlook the matter this time in exchange for fixing everything immediately. Lucilla gave him a look of disgust and conditioned that he eat every rotten ingredient in that room before her to reconsider the matter, making the man strike with terror and nausea. The director's retching sounds echoed in the area, while Amelia was hiding inside the pantry, hugging herself in shock at what she heard. Lucilla mocked his inability to eat the food, scolding him for feeding children things his stomach couldn't handle. Then she ordered him to take his entire staff and return to their homes to wait for their punishment, while Amelia watched the scene from the door crack and suppressed her feeling of nausea. A wide smile appeared on Amelia's face, feeling spite toward the director who would end up keeping those rat-filled biscuits for himself. Amelia came out of her hiding place with quiet steps, realizing that this lady didn't come just to stare at them as if they were animals in a zoo, but to save them. With a look full of praise, Amelia addressed her absent uncle in her soul, telling him she met a truly amazing lady today. Amelia remembered Lucilla's warm smile, certain she was the first person to care for them sincerely and honestly. The girl stood watching Lucilla's carriage move away, wondering in nostalgia if she would have a chance to see her again. By evening, public security office forces arrived at the orphanage, as Lucilla had headed to them to file an official report as soon as she left. The director and his staff were handcuffed and led away under arrest on charges of child abuse, while Lucilla searched the director's office and confiscated every document proving his involvement in embezzlement. After that, Lucilla paid an extra wage to the duchy's servants to clean the entire house and renew the food stock, believing things would settle for a while. But she soon realized while reviewing the papers that every teacher in the house also represented a problem, meaning the entire place needed a complete overhaul, which far exceeded her expectations. Lucilla looked around anxiously, wondering who would take care of all these children in this critical situation. The children gathered around her with looks shining with admiration and gratitude, considering her their savior, which increased her tension and sweating. One of the children innocently asked her about where the teachers went. She answered with hesitation that they committed many bad acts, and went to receive their punishment for another child to wonder who would stay with them now. Lucilla stood in confusion, realizing that her thought that getting rid of bad people would fix everything was naive thinking. She had completely forgotten that she needed to find alternatives for caring for these little ones looking at her with anticipation. Adding to her worries was the realization that new funding wouldn't be available until next month and that this money would barely suffice to repair the dilapidated building. How could she find new teachers? Lucilla thought about using the inheritance her sister left her to cover the expenses. She recalled the memory of her sister holding her hands and telling her with a tender smile that she was leaving her inheritance for her to live a happy life. Lucilla hesitated, her eyes filled with confusion, remembering that that money came at the price of her sister's life and that she had sworn to use it only for Lucian. She directed her gaze toward Edwin and Amelia, wondering in her soul if it was right to spend this money on Edwin. He is, after all, the son of the man who made her sister's life miserable and the person who might harm Lucian in the far future. But her look softened and felt for them, thinking these innocent children committed no sin deserving of suffering. She finally reached a full conviction that if she caused the misery of the original protagonist now, she would never be able to change the dark and villainous future that awaited Lucian. Lucilla made up her mind and gripped her hand with determination, convinced that using her inheritance money to help these children was the ideal choice, and fully believing her late sister would have felt happy about this decision. She turned toward Edwin and the rest of the children to reassure them and ask them not to worry about anything, promising them with a warm smile that new teachers would arrive soon, and until then, she would personally take charge of caring for and looking after them. The children's cheers of joy rose and they gathered around her enthusiastically, so she shared the fun with them, suggesting they spend time playing together. With nightfall, Lucilla bid farewell to the duchy's servants who worked hard all day and asked them to return to rest. Despite the head servant's great concern for her staying alone to care for all these children, she reassured him it was only one night and she could manage. She promised the servants to return with sunrise, and they asked her to take care of Lucian too. The mention of Lucian's name stirred her anxiety, as she remembered her promise to him to return quickly, and imagined him crying and demanding her return, wondering what he was doing at that moment. She imagined his grand welcome for her with his innocent smile and open arms, which made her place her hands on her chest with nostalgia, wanting to run to him and hug him, but she whispered to herself, begging him to wait for her just a little longer. Lucilla believed that her experience in raising a troublemaker child like Lucian would make spending one night with these children a very easy matter, but she soon realized she was completely wrong. After feeding them dinner and bathing them all, only putting them in their beds remained. She contemplated whether she could really make them sleep peacefully. She remembered well how Lucian was overflowing with energy before bed, refusing to give in to sleep, which forced her to play with him and run around all night until he finally fell asleep. When she opened the room door quietly to put them to sleep, she was surprised by the room's darkness and quiet. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw everyone had already fallen asleep. But in the middle of the silence, she noticed that the girl, Amelia, was still awake and sitting in another child's bed. Lucilla approached her while Amelia was covering one of the children and asked her with surprise if it was their habit to sleep at this early hour. Amelia answered calmly that they were used to that because the director and teachers used to punish them if they didn't sleep early, so the matter became an ingrained habit in their bodies, which made Lucilla feel a lump and pain in her heart again hearing that. Lucilla asked her if she didn't feel sleepy. The girl explained she was used to staying up to watch the rest of the children and check on them. Lucilla placed her hand tenderly on Amelia's bed, expressing her admiration for her great maturity, and promised her she would make sure from now on to bring good teachers so she could dedicate herself to playing and living her childhood like the rest of the children. Then she smiled kindly and suggested to Amelia that they sleep together that night, offering to read her a fairy tale until she fell asleep after her long day. Despite Amelia's attempt to show her independence and saying she could sleep alone, Lucilla insisted tenderly, affirming that feeling care is comforting sometimes. Amelia surrendered silently. Lucilla sat beside her and prepared to start, while Amelia agreed quietly, hiding her excitement and anticipation to hear the story. No sooner had Lucilla begun narrating the story about a small mountain village than the sound of a baby's loud crying suddenly interrupted her. Lucilla was shocked by the presence of an infant there and wondered fearfully if her loud voice was what woke him. Other children began tossing in their beds with annoyance, making Lucilla panic for fear that everyone would wake up due to this noise. Amelia pushed the blanket off her and asked Lucilla quite calmly to go check on the infant first. Lucilla apologized to her in confusion, promising her to return to finish the story later. Lucilla carried the crying infant, trying to calm him, but she soon realized from the smell emanating that he needed his diaper changed and began to wonder in panic about the diaper location. At that moment, Amelia appeared holding a clean diaper and offered to change it herself, but Lucilla hesitated, considering this work belongs to adults and not children. Amelia insisted, coldly affirming she was used to doing that always. Before Lucilla could process the situation, other cries for help rose in the area, a child complaining of hunger, and another crying, making Lucilla's features pale from the horror of the shock. Lucilla stood in a state of utter chaos and despair, carrying the infant while Amelia stood with her usual calmness. Lucilla surrendered to reality with difficulty and told Amelia helplessly she would rely on her tonight. Amelia took charge of the crying child in her arms and asked Lucilla to help her on the other side. The girl agreed immediately. Silence prevailed for a moment before Lucilla heard a voice guiding someone to the bathroom. She was surprised, wondering about the identity of that voice's owner. She turned to find Edwin holding a small child's hand and guiding him to the correct place, so she was surprised by his presence. Lucilla thanked Edwin kindly for his help despite him feeling tired, which made him surprised and confused. Edwin's cheeks flushed with shyness, and he justified his position that he was only following Amelia, while Lucilla realized in her soul that the matter exceeded them being two impressive children. They had carried a burden far beyond their capacity. Amelia smiled proudly, so Lucilla asked her to help her a little more, promising her to prepare a cup of delicious cocoa as soon as they finished. The girl agreed enthusiastically. Thus, the three continued to work actively as Edwin brought milk bottles and cups for Lucilla to wash. In the end, Lucilla sat reading the bedtime story to the children. Thanks to Edwin and Amelia's help, she managed to make all the children sleep peacefully. Lucilla admitted to herself she wouldn't have accomplished that without their help, and headed toward them carrying a tray with 2 cups of hot cocoa, telling them the work was hard. But when she approached, she found Amelia and Edwin had fallen into a deep sleep next to each other, so she realized they were extremely exhausted. Lucilla placed the tray quietly on the side table and decided to leave them to enjoy a quiet sleep, then covered them gently. Lucilla contemplated them with a tender smile, thinking how cute they were and how they looked like angels while sleeping. She thanked them in secret for their efforts that day, realizing that at that moment they were nothing but 2 wonderful little children, and not the story's protagonists who would hurt her nephew in the future. Lucilla imagined a bright scene where Lucian runs and plays with Edwin and Amelia, wondering if he could become a friend to them one day. The next morning, the Duke's family carriage arrived at the orphanage, and the servants stepped out announcing their arrival. As soon as they saw Lucilla, shock hit them, and they wondered fearfully if she had stayed up all night. Lucilla appeared with pale features and tired eyes, and answered them with a weary smile that she had a lot of work to do. The servants insisted on taking over and asked her to return to the palace to get some rest. Lucilla thanked them with relief, thinking that if she hadn't prepared the documents taking advantage of the Duke's neglect, she wouldn't have been able to get the servants' help. Before leaving, Lucilla pointed to a basket full of biscuit bags she had baked herself and asked them to distribute them to the children when they woke up, which surprised the maids at her doing all that alone. Lucilla swayed slightly from fatigue while laughing lightly, affirming it wasn't special, then left the children in their care. Lucilla sat in the carriage sighing with relief and admitting her feeling of exhaustion, and thanked God for the arrival of the Duke's servants earlier than she expected. Despite her fatigue, she smiled, thinking the experience was fun, and that she believes she succeeded in building a good relationship with Edwin and Amelia. She closed her eyes, looking forward with longing to seeing Lucian soon, wishing to reach him quickly. The carriage finally arrived, and the driver woke her announcing their arrival. She woke up startled, wondering if she had dozed off. As soon as she stepped down, Lucian ran toward her, calling her name and crying, throwing himself into her arms, clutching her dress. Lucian hid her dress with his hand while sobbing, reproaching her for being late and reminding her of her promise to return early the previous day. Lucilla tried to calm him, apologizing to him sincerely, but he interrupted her with an angry shout, calling her a liar. He looked at her with tearful eyes full of disappointment, reminding her she told him she didn't leave him because she was angry with him. Lucilla realized her long absence made Lucian misunderstand. While she was thinking about that, a sudden dizzy spell overcame her. Lucilla began to lose her balance, so Lucian looked at her in shock, calling her name, while the servants rushed toward her in panic, wondering if she was okay. Lucilla collapsed to the ground, losing consciousness from sheer exhaustion. The servant rushed toward her in panic, while little Lucian stood shocked, calling out to his aunt with a trembling voice. The voices of the servants echoed, calling her name in anxiety, while she barely whispered Lucian's name in the depths of her swoon as they hurried to carry her to her bedroom. As she sank into the abyss of unconsciousness, her only concern was to reassure Lucian, whose small face was etched with terror, trying to tell him she was fine. Lucilla woke up to the sound of Lucian's crying and his pleas for her to open her eyes. As soon as she opened them, the little one threw himself into her arms, shouting her name in joy, confessing his intense fear that she would never wake up. One of the maids entered to tell her that she had finally woken up, explaining with astonishment that she had been unconscious for an entire day, and that young Master Lucian had not left her side all night. Lucilla noticed Lucian still clinging to her and anxiously asked if he was okay, but he answered only with more tears. The child confessed to her, weeping, that he feared she might have died because of him, as he was terrified by the thought of that happening. Then he whispered sad words expressing his deepest fear, that if he lost her, he would be completely alone in this world. And here Lucilla realized the extent of his loneliness and fragility. She recalled the events of the original novel and remembered that the turning point of Lucian becoming a villain began exactly when the original Aunt Lucilla abandoned him and fled, realizing that his behavior was not innate violence but a reaction to his sense of abandonment. While Lucian continued to cry and apologize, Lucilla realized the full truth. He is not a villain by nature, but merely a child starving for love and tenderness. She looked at him with affection and vowed to herself that she would always stay by his side and help him grow up healthy, instead of becoming the villain he was destined to be. She wondered how she could ever abandon a sweet child like him who worried about his aunt to this extent, so she promised him she would never leave him and would not die. To teach him a lesson, Lucilla pretended to be in pain, wondering aloud if her stomach ached because he hit her yesterday, which immediately sparked Lucian's concern. The little one hurried to embrace her, apologizing sincerely and promising he would never hit her again, pleading with her not to be hurt. Lucilla realized this method might prevent him from acting impulsively when he feels excited. She asked him to make a promise not to do it again, and he enthusiastically agreed and confirmed his vow. Lucilla hugged him lovingly, thinking about how cute he is. He was overcome by sleep from extreme fatigue and emotional exhaustion, falling asleep in her arms. The maid offered to take care of the little one so that she could have her breakfast. But Lucilla gently refused the offer, preferring to stay beside Lucian a little longer, while the little one whispered her name in his deep sleep. Then the maid suggested bringing some light refreshments to the room, so Lucilla smiled and thanked her. As she contemplated his peacefully sleeping face, she wished him a restful sleep. 4 days later, life at the orphanage had begun to take a different turn, as the children were romping and playing outside. Amelia contemplated the great changes that had occurred in the place after that lady's visit. The windows were repaired, new toys were brought, and most importantly, they had kind teachers who treated them with tenderness. Although she knew she was supposed to be happy with all these improvements, she felt a strange void in her heart. She realized that the lady did not intend to adopt any child, yet hope remained that she might return to visit them again. Her daydreaming was interrupted by Edwin's voice calling her after he found her hiding spot. Edwin noticed the bag of biscuits she was still keeping and asked why she hadn't eaten it yet. She replied that she was saving it to share with that lady upon her return, but added sadly that a feeling possessed her that she might never come back. Edwin stubbornly rejected this, insisting she would definitely return, but his voice was suddenly cut off by a loud growl from his hungry stomach. Amelia couldn't help herself and burst out laughing at the situation, while Edwin was overcome with confusion and extreme embarrassment. Amelia decided to share with him the biscuits she was saving, and despite Edwin's initial hesitation knowing the value of these biscuits to her, she smiled and reassured him that it was okay, explaining that if the biscuit stayed any longer, it would spoil and neither of them would be able to eat it. But before they could begin to divide it, the silence was interrupted by the sound of a luxury carriage arriving at the orphanage. The children, including Amelia and Edwin, gathered with a look of hope in their eyes, wondering if the visitor was that lady they were waiting for. Indeed, Lucilla stepped out of the carriage with a bright smile. The children rushed to welcome her with great warmth, shouting her name and expressing how much they missed her. So she returned the greeting warmly and asked how they were. She apologized to them for her sudden departure last time without saying goodbye and told them she had brought some gifts. But more importantly, there was someone special she wanted to introduce to them, which piqued the children's curiosity. Lucilla asked Lucian, who was hiding shyly behind her, to step forward. Then she proudly introduced him to the children as her nephew. Lucian had made a vow to himself to become a good boy for a very important mission, which was to ensure that his aunt would never leave him. This was what drove him to change his behavior completely. He started helping with cleaning in a surprise that stunned the palace servants. He even tried peeling apples to please her. The little one felt great relief at his aunt's happiness with his change, but one worry continued to haunt him. It was his jealousy over her interest in the orphanage children, and his fear that his aunt might take them as new nephews and nieces, for he wanted to be the only one in her life. For this reason, he clung to his aunt and begged her to take him with her on her next visit, and despite her initial hesitation, he feared his aunt would be taken from him if he wasn't by her side, so he felt he had no choice. He used all the cuteness and innocence he had to convince her. Lucilla surrendered to his charm and agreed to take him after he changed his clothes. Upon their arrival at the orphanage, Lucian felt awestruck by the large number of children and began to wonder anxiously if he could really protect his aunt from all these potential rivals. At that moment, a small girl stepped forward with a friendly smile and welcomed him kindly. Then she introduced herself as Amelia. Lucian froze in his place, stunned by her beauty, feeling extreme confusion and a fluttering in his heart he had never experienced before. Meanwhile, Amelia told him she hoped they would become good friends from now on. Lucian admitted to himself that he had never seen a girl more beautiful than his aunt, but this girl was different, and he wondered why his heart was racing like this. The scene was interrupted by Edwin, who revealed to Lucilla that Amelia was saving the piece of biscuit for her, which made Lucian realize how kind she was, and his admiration for her grew as she looked shy and embarrassed. Edwin confirmed that Amelia had been waiting for her return impatiently all the time, despite her attempt to deny it. This made Lucilla remember how Amelia was cautious and reserved in their first meeting, and she realized the extent of the change that had occurred in the little girl and her trust in her. Lucilla felt warm emotions flooding her, so she playfully told Amelia that those biscuits were made especially for her, and promised her that she would bring more delicious snacks often to share together. Lucilla recalled the meeting she had with Amelia and how she was surprised that she hadn't eaten the piece of biscuit yet. Confusion hit Amelia from her sudden kindness. Meanwhile, the new teachers stepped forward to greet Lucilla, apologizing for their delay in welcoming her because they were busy helping some children. Lucilla asked them to go inside to discuss some matters related to managing the orphanage's affairs. One of the teachers asked anxiously if she meant now, but Lucilla explained that she had brought her nephew with her this time. Amelia acted cleverly, grabbing Lucian's hand and reassuring Lucilla that she would stay with him so she could go, which surprised and confused Lucian. Lucilla asked him anxiously if he was sure he agreed, and he answered with hesitation that he didn't mind. Lucilla smiled and thanked Amelia, asking her to take good care of Lucian, and left thinking that nothing worrying would happen during her short absence. An hour later, Lucian was sitting beside Amelia and Edwin while Edwin expressed his happiness at Amelia's frequent visits. Amelia shyly scolded Edwin and asked him not to tell Lucilla again about her keeping the biscuit for her, as she felt extremely embarrassed. But Lucian was watching their closeness with resentment, as he felt jealous of the close relationship between Amelia and Edwin. When Edwin suggested that Amelia taste the biscuit because it was really delicious, she decided to divide it into 3 parts so they could all share it. Lucian noticed their great joy at just a piece of biscuit and compared that to his luxurious life where he could eat whatever sweets he wanted. Here, an idea occurred to him. He turned to Amelia and innocently asked her if they were beggars. Then he added enthusiastically that he has many delicious pieces of biscuits of all kinds at his house. Astonishment hit Amelia and Edwin, so they went completely silent. Lucian interpreted their silence as jealousy and happily offered them to come to his house to eat as much sweets as they wanted. Amelia firmly interrupted him, explaining to him that his way of speaking was completely disastrous. She told him she realized he didn't mean to hurt anyone, but she wondered if he was aware of the rudeness of suddenly describing someone as a beggar. She explained to him that describing those who are less fortunate as beggars is wrong in itself and that what he just said was hurtful to their feelings, which gave Lucian a real shock. Lucian immediately remembered his aunt's advice not to do anything that saddens others, and feared that if she found out what happened, she might suffer a shock and lose consciousness again. Amelia told him she would overlook the matter this time only because he is Lady Lucilla's nephew, but she was surprised when she noticed he started to cry, offering a sincere apology while sobbing, confessing he never meant to bother her, and that he rarely had the chance to make new friends. Then he begged her not to tell his aunt what happened, because he feared it would sadden her. Amelia sighed and asked him to stop crying, then offered him a piece of the biscuit. Lucian asked her pleadingly if that meant she wouldn't tell his aunt, and she replied that she doesn't do trivial things like that, but emphasized the necessity for him to fix his way of speaking. Then she offered to help him with that, but warned him she wouldn't be lenient with him next time if he repeated his act, and asked if he understood. He answered very enthusiastically, so Lucian looked at her with admiration and wonder, wondering in his soul if Amelia was an angel. 2 hours later, Lucilla's meeting with the teachers ended. She realized with concern that time had passed faster than she expected, and got up quickly to look for Lucian. Anxiety took hold of Lucilla as she remembered that whenever she left Lucian alone with other children, an accident was bound to happen, so she feared his relationship had already soured with the original protagonists. Suddenly, her train of thought was cut by the sound of barking. She wondered in confusion if there was a puppy in the orphanage, but what she saw was much stranger than that. She found Lucian on all fours, acting like a small puppy, while Amelia patted his head tenderly and called him Coco, praising him for being a good boy. Lucilla was hit by a massive shock that silenced her tongue, trying to process the strange scene unfolding before her. But soon her attention turned toward Edwin, who was sitting aside, resentment appearing on his face as he clutched his doll. She realized he was upset because Amelia only cared about Lucian. Here, Lucilla remembered an important detail from the original novel's events, which is that this is the period when Edwin is supposed to start liking Amelia. This sparked a new concern in her. What if the original hero and Lucian ended up hating each other because of this situation? A feeling of complete helplessness overcame her, admitting to herself that she could not understand these children at all. But she felt some relief when she noticed that Amelia seemed to like Lucian at least. It also didn't escape her that Lucien was smiling at Amelia in a way she had never seen him smile at anyone before, confirming his feelings for her. Her gaze returned to Edwin, who clearly felt like an outcast because of Lucien. She realized it would turn into a real problem if Edwin started to hate Lucien because of this situation, and wondered in confusion what she should do. She decided that her first step must be to console Edwin, believing they are still children and that creating an atmosphere of group play and fun might solve the problem. She approached him quietly and asked him what he was doing alone. She thanked him for taking care of her nephew along with Amelia, although her mind was still trying to understand their strange play. Edwin answered humbly that Amelia was the one who was truly taking care of Lucien, and that he hadn't done anything worth mentioning. Lucilla asked him kindly if he was upset because Amelia only cared about Lucien, but he hurried to deny that, asserting that Amelia is kind to everyone. Despite his denial, it was clear to Lucilla that he was extremely upset, so she thought of the best way to console him. Lucilla began telling him that she too had a very close friend when she was little. One day, that friend became close to another girl, which made her feel very upset because she wanted to be her only friend. Over time, she realized there are many other people in the world, and that her heart would be hurt and broken if she felt sad every time someone dear to her found a new friend. Edwin confessed that Amelia is the most precious person to him, then started to belittle himself, saying she is very beautiful, mature, and has a wonderful personality. As for him, he sees himself as shy and not handsome, which is why he believes she doesn't like him. Lucilla was shocked by his lack of self-confidence. Lucilla hurried to deny his words, asserting to him that it wasn't true at all, and she opened what she called Lucilla's hair and began to braid it. A wonderful idea flashed in her mind to lift his spirits. She opened what she called Lucilla's hair salon, sparking the children's admiration and astonishment at her skill. Then she told Edwin his turn had come for her to cut his bangs. She explained to him that she is very skilled at that because she always cuts Lucien's hair, as he doesn't like anyone else to touch his hair. As soon as she finished, Edwin's innocent features appeared clearly. He looked very cute and asked her eagerly if he was really so. Lucilla turned toward Amelia to ask her opinion. The girl expressed her surprise and admiration, telling Edwin he looks completely different. The children expressed their great admiration for Edwin's new look, likening his eyes to blazing meteors due to their beauty, which made Edwin flush with shyness and smile with extreme happiness. At that moment, Lucien ran toward his aunt and grabbed her dress, eagerly demanding her to cut his hair too. Lucilla was surprised by his request, justifying that she had cut his hair a short time ago. She reminded him that he always tries to evade and flee whenever she asks to cut his hair, while Amelia was cleaning Edwin with a towel. But Lucien denied that strongly and insisted she cut his hair quickly. Lucilla surrendered to his insistence and asked him to sit to trim the edges of his hair from the front and back, while he enthusiastically recommended she make his look handsome. As soon as she finished cutting, Lucien jumped from his place and turned toward Amelia, asking her eagerly if he looked handsome and cute in her eyes, while Lucilla stood watching them, sighing and thinking about the difficulty of raising children. But her sight of Lucien's immense happiness as soon as Amelia praised his cute look made a satisfied smile etch on her lips, realizing his happiness reflects positively on her feelings. Soon the rest of the children gathered around Lucilla, their voices rising with enthusiasm, demanding she cut their hair too. So she agreed with a wide smile and asked them to approach. Since then, Lucien used to accompany her on her frequent visits to the orphanage, just so he could see Amelia. One day, while he was hurrying his aunt to leave the palace, she asked him curiously about what he was hiding inside his full bag. He answered shyly and enthusiastically that he brought his toys to show them to Amelia, wondering if she would like them. Lucilla realized in secret that he had completely fallen in love with Amelia and was no longer even trying to hide it. Lucilla reassured him that Amelia would definitely love them and was about to set off with him, but a familiar voice stopped her, calling her name. The voice's owner asked her in a serious tone about where she takes the young master every morning lately. So Lucilla froze in her place, having recognized the speaker's identity. This man was Sir Gilbert Gillian, the direct assistant to the Duke of Bellamont, who told her sternly that he came to discuss the documents she handed him regarding the embezzlement of orphanage funds. Lucilla explained to him she was in the process of taking Lucien to that orphanage, while the little one hid behind her dress watching the situation, justifying it by Lucien loving the children there very much. Gilbert pushed his glasses in objection, noting that the young master remains the Duke's son and that it is unseemly for him to mingle with these commoners, expressing concern that he might acquire bad friends and his morals might deteriorate further. Lucilla felt resentment at his words, thinking sarcastically that he speaks any nonsense that comes to his mind, while the Duke he serves doesn't even bother to see his son. Lucilla. She raises Lucien poorly and doesn't bring her to the Duke's palace. thinking she raises Lucian poorly and doesn't bring him up as a true noble. What sparked her sarcasm more was the contradiction in his personality. In the future, he will treat Edwin, the upcoming illegitimate child from the same orphanage he despises, with all respect and appreciation just because the Duke will favor him. Lucilla defended her position strongly, asserting to Gilbert that Lucian acquires emotional stability through making friends and volunteering at the orphanage, and emphasizing that the children there are good and the adults were the root of the problem. Gilbert smiled with biting sarcasm, commenting that he assumes Lucian will learn how to deal with servants through playing with these children. Then he told her in a commanding tone not to be late in returning today, because he has an important matter he must inform her of. Lucilla boiled with anger inside her from his rudeness. After his departure, Lucilla regained her calm and called Lucian vibrantly to set off and enjoy their time. The little one agreed enthusiastically. At the orphanage, Lucian took out his luxury toys full of sweets and dolls before the dazzled children, announcing boastfully that he would allow them to play with them today as a special exception. Lucilla watched the scene from afar with a smile, astonished at his acceptance of the idea of sharing, and realizing he does that only to impress Amelia. But she considered that a very positive change, especially when she saw the children gathering happily around the toys, including Amelia, who grabbed a music box. Lucian approached Amelia and asked her with interest about the toy she would like to play with. The girl went silent for moments while contemplating what was in her hand. Amelia expressed her admiration for the beauty of the golden music box. Lucian told her proudly his aunt gifted it to him last Christmas. He added that its tunes help him fall asleep when he feels sleepy. Amelia looked at the box with eyes full of memories and understood the matter calmly, remembering how her mother used to sing her the same melody as a lullaby to calm her whenever she felt afraid, and sleep eluded her, which doubled her nostalgia and longing for her home. The girl held her necklace, her eyes tearing up, thinking of Lucilla's kind character and wondering in her soul whether that lady would lend her a helping hand instead of exploiting her if she discovered her true identity as the lost daughter of the Marquis Agrees family. Amelia closed the music box with determination, having made a fateful decision, announcing to herself that she would no longer stand idly by, waiting for her uncle, but would take the initiative to return herself. Amelia called Lucilla, approaching her to tell her there was a matter she would like to talk to her about privately. Seriousness was clear on Amelia's face as she requested this private meeting, which piqued Lucilla's interest. Lucilla looked at her with curiosity, wondering to herself about the nature of this important talk that required this seclusion. Lucilla sat with Amelia at a separate table and poured her a cup of warm milk tea, then asked her kindly what she wanted to say. Amelia began her talk by asking Lucilla if she remembered the carriage accident that occurred a few years ago, in which the young lady of the Marquis Agrees family was lost, paving the way that what she would say might be hard to believe, but she is actually that lost girl. Lucilla's eyes widened in feigned shock, having realized in her secret that Amelia, who hid her identity all this time, had finally decided to reveal the truth to her. Amelia continued narrating her story with tearful eyes, explaining that her parents had died in that tragic accident, but she has an uncle who must be waiting for her return impatiently. She revealed that her uncle's name is Claude Agrees, and he is the current leader of the Marquis family. Amelia recalled her happy childhood memories, noting the close relationship that gathered her parents and her uncle in the past, and how he used to visit them regularly. She remembered how she used to run to welcome him enthusiastically as soon as she saw him, expressing her great longing for him with an innocent smile, and how her uncle used to carry her tenderly, caring for her and loving her as if she were his own daughter. But things changed after the accident. After she became the sole survivor and ended up in the orphanage, she didn't have the courage to return, realizing while still young that there were greedy people who would try to exploit her young age and fragile situation. Lucilla asked her with astonishment if this was the first time she had told anyone this secret. Amelia confirmed that, explaining that her sight of the greedy orphanage director's behavior made her certain that if she revealed her noble blood, he would sell her at a high price, which made her lose trust in everyone and made her hide her identity. Besides that, she felt a great responsibility toward the other children in the house, so she decided to stay to protect them while waiting for her uncle. Lucilla looked at her with silence and admiration, appreciating the extent of maturity and courage this child possessed. Amelia smiled kindly and told Lucilla that everything is fine now, expressing her confidence that Lucilla will turn the orphanage into a wonderful place. And therefore, she decided to trust her and ask her for one favor. Amelia asked Lucilla to help her return safely to her uncle. Lucilla was surprised by the depth of trust the girl placed in her, thinking that helping her would speed up Amelia's reunion with her uncle compared to what happened in the original story. But Lucilla soon made up her mind and thanked Amelia for her trust in her, promising her she would make sure to return her to her uncle, resolving not to fail the courage the child showed in opening her heart to her. After returning to the ducal palace, Lucilla hurried to write a letter to the headquarters of the Marquis Agree's family, informing them of Amelia's whereabouts and specifying the orphanage's location for them. A few days later, at the headquarters of the Marquis Agree's family, Claude Agrees returned late at night to ask his follower eagerly if there was any progress in the search for the young lady. But the answer came disappointing, as usual. Claude felt sadness and frustration, remembering how he spared no effort in searching for his niece since the accident occurred, without finding any thread pointing to her, praying in his secret that Amelia is well wherever she is. At that moment, his follower told him that a letter had arrived for him during his absence, which sparked his surprise. The follower explained that the letter appeared as if sent by a young lady named Lucilla Lil Fry. Claude pulled the red-sealed letter, wondering about the sender's identity. Claude remembered that this name belongs to the young lady staying in the palace of the Duke of Bellamont for the purpose of caring for her nephew, and found the matter strange given the lack of any prior connection or knowledge between them. But as soon as he started reading the letter's content, he discovered that it related to an urgent matter, as Lucilla informs him that a girl believed to be the lost young lady of the Agrees family was found in one of the orphanages located in the Bellamont province. Claude's eyes widened from the horror of the shock, while Lucilla concluded her letter with a request to visit him as soon as possible to confirm the child's identity. Claude's hands trembled while holding the letter, not believing what he reads, which sparked the concern of his follower, who asked him in panic about the letter's content. Claude ordered his follower, with a voice full of emotion and pleasure, to prepare a carriage to head to Bellamont lands immediately, without any delay. The speeding carriage set off, cutting its way amidst darkness and heavy rain, while Claude finally realized that Amelia's presence in an orphanage affiliated with the Bellamont province is the reason that made him unable to find her throughout the past 3 years. Marquis Claude Agrees was sitting inside his carriage that was cutting its way with difficulty amidst heavy rain, contemplating the letter that reached him, and thought about the vast distance separating his province and the Bellamont Duchy lands, which made it hard for him to send his men to search there and settle for gathering information only, which made him think this letter might be just false information like other letters he received previously. He recalled in his memory how many flocked to him with fabricated information, craving the reward since he started the search journey for his niece Amelia, and the matter even reached some of them bringing girls who resemble her. But disappointment was always waiting for him, as none of them were the real Amelia. Despite all that, a strange and different feeling overcame him this time as he looked at the letter, as if his heart tells him he will finally meet his lost niece. This hope and feeling of urgency drove him to complain about the bad weather hindering their progress, so he shouted to his driver, ordering him to increase the carriage speed, ignoring the road danger. In the midst of their rush, the carriage slipped violently. Amidst the mud and the driver's shouting, Rose warning his master of the imminent danger. Meanwhile, specifically in the Bellamont Duchy Palace, Lucilla was standing with Lucien watching the pouring rain from the window and wondered anxiously if they could visit the orphanage in light of this bad weather, while Lucien expressed his urgency to see Amelia, so Lucilla agreed to hurry in preparation. Their preparations were interrupted by a maid entering with features cloaked in tension to tell Lucilla of a serious landslide occurring near the southern part of Mount Agile, adjacent to the duchy's lands. Lucilla was surprised by the occurrence of such a large accident on the same day the Duke is absent from the palace and asked anxiously if there were any injuries. The maid reassured her that all duchy residents are well, but she added, explaining that a strange carriage driver knocked on their doors asking for help, and told her that his master was buried under the mud while he was still inside his carriage, and the appalling thing in the matter is that this master was none other than Marquis Claude Agrees. The name Claude Agrees fell like a thunderbolt on Lucilla's ears. Her breathing accelerated and she froze in her place from the horror of the shock. At the same time, Amelia was sitting in the orphanage watching the rain from her window and thinking about Lucilla and Lucien's promise to visit her that day. A mysterious feeling of anxiety fills her, and she wonders in her soul whether things will go well. At the landslide site, the men were working hard under heavy rain to search for the lost carriage, but the thick mud increased the task's difficulty. Lucilla stood following the rescue operations, and panic was gnawing her heart, thinking about the possibility of the Marquis being buried under that massive pile of dirt, and started blaming herself bitterly for sending that letter. She realized with horror that this accident exactly matches the tragedy that claimed Amelia's parents' lives, and thought she should have let events take their natural course, as in the original story, even if it required some delay. Fear controlled her that she might be the reason for Amelia losing her remaining family members, but she soon regained her composure and shook off feelings of blame, realizing time isn't suitable for regret, and that saving the Marquis is the top priority now. Lucilla decided to request support from the Duke, but a familiar bark caught her attention. She saw a maid carrying a small white puppy, and remembered this puppy was used in tracking small animals. An idea flashed in her mind to use it to track the scent of the Marquis's belongings and locate him under the mud. Indeed, the puppy started sniffing the place until it stopped at a certain spot and started barking. Lucilla confirmed that every second has its price now. Lucilla joined the rescue teams to start digging herself amidst mud and rain, justifying her act that they need every capable hand to help. The maid stood looking at her in complete amazement, while the men continued digging with extreme caution and moving mud with buckets to avoid continuous soil collapse. Suddenly, Sir Gilbert Gillian reached the site angry and shouted to Lucilla, demanding her to stop immediately what she was doing. He scolded her severely for her going out in this weather and acting in a way unbefitting a lady of nobility before everyone, accusing her of bringing shame to the Bellamont family name. Lucilla turned to him with firm features and scolded him for his ridiculous thinking, wondering indignantly about the value of pride and reputation when a human life is at stake, scolding him sharply and demanding him not to block their way if he doesn't intend to provide real help. But before she could finish her words, a loud metallic impact sound boomed, making her jump in shock, followed by men's shouts as they directed attention toward the sunken carriage door, demanding to bring a rope immediately. Encouragement shouts rose, urging everyone to pull with all their strength, until they finally managed to extract the carriage from the middle of the mud. Lucilla stood stiff in her place. Her eyes widened from the horror of the scene, unable to respond to calls of reassurance about her. After realizing the person who was rescued is indeed Marquis Agrees. The Marquis was sitting inside the carriage wreckage, catching his breath with difficulty while blood covered his face. But it appeared clearly he survived with his life and that his injuries don't pose a mortal danger. The Marquis regained consciousness slowly and started looking around in confusion and blur, asking weakly about the place he is in. Lucilla rushed toward him and relief tears fill her eyes, expressing sincerely her extreme happiness for his staying alive. The Marquis eyed her with confused looks, wondering in his soul about this strange woman's identity and why she looks at him with all this tenderness and affection, although they never met before. Lucilla realized his confusion, so she took the initiative to wipe her tears and smiled kindly, introducing herself as Lucilla Lil Fry, the lady who sent him the letter, and cheered him that his niece Amelia is waiting for him. As soon as he heard Amelia's name, the Marquis jumped, forgetting his wounds and blood bleeding from his leg, and requested insistently to be escorted to her place immediately. But the servants hurried to prevent him from moving, asserting to him he is in dire need to go to Bellamont Palace to receive treatment first, especially after the rain stopped. The Marquis looked at Lucilla with eyes that plead, asserting that Amelia is waiting for him. Lucilla was deeply moved by his position, realizing that despite his exhausted and injured body, he thinks of nothing but his niece. The Marquis continued his plea, noting that he searched for that child for 3 continuous years and desires now to perform his role as an uncle for her. Lucilla held his arms firmly and asked him to stop exhausting himself. Lucilla promised him sincerely that she will guarantee his meeting with Amelia, but explained sternly that the current time is unsuitable, and asked him to imagine the extent of shock that will hit the child if she saw him in this horrific state, and reminded him that Amelia had lost her parents previously in a similar carriage accident, and that seeing him soaked in blood might cause her a harsh psychological shock. So the Marquis went silent for moments, having realized his rush mistake, admitting he didn't think of the consequences. Lucilla guided him quietly to head with her to the ducal palace to start treatment. But as soon as she was reassured about him, a strange and sudden feeling of illness overcame her. Her vision started to blur, and she felt as if the world was spinning around her. Realizing that her tension's disappearance after confirming the Marquis's safety made her body finally surrender to exhaustion. Lucilla swayed and lost her balance to fall in the arms of the astonished Marquis, while she felt intense heat sweeping her entire body. Voices around her rose, trying to wake her, and those present realized in panic she was afflicted with fever as a result of staying under heavy rain for a long time, so they hurried to move her to the carriage. The Marquis looked at her with extreme concern and called her name in an attempt to reassure about her, while Lucilla was blaming herself for not noticing her condition given her intense preoccupation with digging under the rain to save him. And in the depths of the faint, a satisfied smile etched on Lucilla's feverish lips. Having realized she managed finally to fulfill her promise to Amelia, after some time, Lucilla opened her eyes slowly in her bedroom, wondering in confusion about her location. Her maid Riley peered from the door with a wide smile, expressing her extreme happiness at her lady waking up finally. Lucilla asked her while trying to sit if she had lost consciousness again. Riley confirmed that to her while approaching carrying a tray, noting that everyone was in a state of extreme concern for her. Riley reassured her lady that she gave her some remaining fever medicines, which helped in her condition improvement. improvement, and more importantly, informed her that Marquis agrees is well and in good health. Lucilla jumped from her bed asking eagerly about the Marquis's place now. The maid answered her quietly that he is currently present in the guest room accompanied by his niece. Lucilla was surprised by Amelia's presence in the palace and asked with astonishment about the reason for that. The maid gave her a look of wonder, reminding her she is the one who requested bringing her yesterday during their return in the carriage. Memory returned Lucilla to her delirium moments inside the speeding carriage, where she kept muttering and ordering the maid to bring Amelia from the orphanage immediately, so the child can meet her uncle as quickly as possible. Riley confirmed to her they executed her orders, expressing her deep move by the emotional family meeting scene that gathered between the child and her uncle, wishing if Lucilla was awake to witness it herself. Suddenly, their talk was interrupted by Lucian's intrusion into the room, where he rushed toward his aunt's bed crying bitterly and calling her loudly. Lucian threw himself in his aunt's arms crying, expressing his extreme fear that she was going to die this time. She reassured him in turn she is fine now, but the little one interrupted her angry, accusing her of lying and reminding her this isn't the first time she loses consciousness, which made her admit to herself she doesn't own what she justifies her position with. While he was still sobbing from crying, his interest shifted suddenly to ask her about the strange man's identity who came with her, which sparked Lucilla's surprise, who wondered about which man he talks about. Lucian started describing him as a tall man with blonde hair resembling Amelia's hair, and on his head bandages. And here Lucilla realized immediately the person he meant. At that moment, Marquis Claude Agrees appeared at the room door, leaning on his crutch, and asked her kindly if she feels better. He explained he felt extreme concern when she collapsed suddenly the previous day, making Lucilla recognize him immediately. Lucilla was hit by confusion. Having realized in the middle of the chaos that happened yesterday, she didn't notice the original heroine's uncle in the novel. Is a man handsome to this extent? The Marquis continued expressing his concern, believing he is the reason behind her illness. But Lucilla hurried to deny that while still moved by his handsomeness, she didn't notice before. The Marquis told her with a smile that sends relief that he heard about everything that happened from Amelia, and that he feels extreme gratitude to her and doesn't know how he can fulfill her right. Lucilla requested from him with humility not to mention the matter, for she did what anyone else would have done. But Lucian, who was in her arms, noticed her face flushing and wondered in confusion about her shyness reason before this man. The scene was interrupted by Amelia's arrival, who looked extremely cute in her new dress and had come immediately upon hearing the news of Lucilla waking up to thank her for returning her to her uncle. The maid Riley was moved seeing the reunion of the uncle and his niece, for the scene returned her by memory to their emotional first meeting moment, making her shed tears again. This pushed Lucilla to wonder about what happened exactly while she was unconscious. A few hours ago, Amelia reached the ducal palace, and a feeling of awe overcame her while contemplating the place's magnificence, wondering if her uncle is inside indeed. The maid confirmed to her he rests in one of the guest rooms. She walked behind the maid in the long corridors, until she stopped before the room door, realizing her uncle, who she long waited for, stands directly behind it. Fears possessed her for moments of him not recognizing her after. 3 full years passed since her disappearance, but she soon gathered her courage, convincing herself he must have been waiting for her with the same extent of longing. And when she opened the door, she found him sitting and had recognized her immediately, calling her by her name with tenderness. Amelia ran toward him and threw herself into his arms in a long-awaited embrace, and extreme longing feelings flooded them. Her uncle held her face with his hands, inspecting her with concern to make sure she is fine and didn't get hurt. She reassured him she is fine, but expressed her great sadness seeing him injured to this extent. He calmed her down, asserting his injuries are just simple scratches, and apologized with sorrow because he took all this time to find her, making the girl burst into crying. The maid Riley was watching the scene from behind the door and couldn't hold her tears while witnessing this emotional meeting. After Lucilla listened to the details of what happened, the Marquis expressed to her again his deep gratitude, explaining she returned to him his only relative in this world, and added with a tone full of sincerity that Amelia is everything to him, and that words are unable to describe the extent of his thanks and appreciation for what she did. Lucilla answered that the matter doesn't require all this thanks, and she didn't do that while expecting any reward. But the Marquis explained his gratitude isn't limited to saving Amelia only, sparking her confusion and making her wonder about what he means. Then the Marquis asked Amelia to hold his crutches for a moment, and before Lucilla could process what happens, he held her hand kindly, then knelt on his knee before her, admitting that without her courage and efforts, he would have frozen to death inside that carriage without seeing Amelia again. And in a sudden movement that hit her with complete amazement, The Marquis leaned and kissed her hand. She wondered in shock about what he does. Then the Marquis swore by everything represented by the Agrees family, pledging to dedicate the rest of his life to her service alone. Lucilla realized in panic this is an oath of honor, which means he grants her authority over his entire family. So she jumped immediately, refusing to accept this vow, and demanded him to retract it immediately. But Amelia intervened, explaining that the oath of honor cannot be retracted ever, and added she didn't save her uncle only, but saved the Agrees family lineage entirely from being cut off. The Marquise agreed with the opinion, asserting she is their family's savior, and insisted he doesn't intend to retract his oath, begging her to accept it. Panic possessed Lucilla, for all her concern was to avoid Lucian's ill-fated fate, and she didn't expect things to develop to this extent. While she was unable to respond, Lucian suddenly rushed to stand between her and the Marquis, shouting at him angrily and demanding him to stay away from his aunt. Lucilla realized he saw her confusion, so he decided to protect her, which she found extremely cute. But she was surprised when Lucian scolded him for kissing her hand and transferring his germ to her while she is sick, so she realized this is his real anger reason. Lucian pulled his aunt by her hand, insisting she wash it immediately. And for fear of her getting sick and collapsing again, he continued in urging her to hurry. At that moment, Lucilla glimpsed her reflection and was hit by horror when she realized she received the oath of honor from the Marquis while she is in a completely miserable state. But Lucian didn't give her a chance to think, but kept demanding her to scrub her hands with soap well and faster. So she responded to him reluctantly while asking him to slow down. Meanwhile, the Marquis decided to grant them some privacy, so he told Amelia they will return to their room for the current time. While they were leaving, Amelia heard two maids whispering who were talking about Lucilla with resentment, describing her as the meddler who brings her guests to the Duke's palace. And one of them wondered sarcastically if she invited him only because she heard rumors of his handsomeness, while Amelia was listening in silence. In his room, the Marquis sighed, wondering if he had rushed in his oath. But he soon remembered Lucilla's confused appearance and found that incredibly cute. Here, Amelia approached him and asked him if he still desires to repay the favor to Lady Lucilla, then told him she has a wonderful idea. Her idea was nothing but for him to marry her. The Marquis was hit by a massive shock and his face flushed. Then she explained to him that she was not joking. Then she explained to him that she had noticed for some reason that the people in this palace do not show any friendliness toward Lucilla. She told him that she heard the servants whispering ill of her while walking in the corridors. The Marquis denounced this, so the girl completed her suggestion that if he married her, he could take her to their palace and give her the life she deserves. She cleverly added that she realized he is not indifferent to her, which increased the confusion of the Marquis, who tried to deny the matter. But Amelia insisted she saw everything, noting that he never looks at other women, and that the look he gave Lucilla during the oath of honor was completely different. In fact, it was exactly like the look her, father gave her mother. Shyness overcame the Marquis, and he admitted to himself that Amelia was right. He recalled the moment he saw Lucilla for the first time, and how he felt a warmth and a fluttering in his heart, realizing that his desire to protect her and stay by her side is not just gratitude, but what is called love at first sight. The Marquis wondered if his feelings were that obvious, and Amelia playfully told him she was the only one who noticed. Then she reassured him that she was watching Lucilla's expressions too, and confirmed with confidence that Lucilla seems interested in him as well, making him wonder with eagerness and hope if that was true. Driven by this hope, the Marquis resolved to propose to her immediately, but Amelia stopped him firmly, explaining that jumping straight to marriage is not a sound idea. She gently scolded him, reminding him of the necessity to be cautious with a delicate personality like Lucilla, so he asked her in confusion what he should do. The girl sighed, realizing he had never dated any girl before, and proudly announced that she would be his private love coach. Her first lesson was for him to start by inviting her for tea and to keep the conversation pleasant and light. So the Marquis rushed to record her advice seriously. A week later, the Marquis had used his injury as an excuse to stay at the Duke's palace to get closer to Lucilla. Following Amelia's advice, he tried to make their meetings seem spontaneous and natural, but his attempts failed. For some mysterious reason, Lucilla avoided him every time he tried to approach. When he finally had the chance to ask her if she had some time, she apologized, being busy with the tasks of the absent Duke, and when he suggested they meet after the Duke's return next week, she was shocked to hear this news. The Marquise noticed her face turn pale and asked anxiously if something was wrong, but she regained her composure and asserted that everything was fine, realizing in her secret that the Duke's assistant had deliberately hidden the matter from her to hinder her affairs. and she decided then that the time had come to bring Edwin to the palace. Lucilla suddenly changed her mind and told the Marquis that she had plenty of time, and suggested he go somewhere with her instead of drinking tea. On their way in the carriage, Amelia was enthusiastically telling her uncle the details of Lucilla's first visit to the orphanage and how she baked biscuits for them that day. Lucilla watched their harmony together and felt that all her efforts were not in vain. She also noticed that Lucien, who was sleeping beside her, no longer seemed as cautious of the Marquis as he had been before. Lucilla thought about her plan, realizing that if she could settle Edwin's matter, she would inevitably be able to change Lucien's future. The plan was to invite Edwin and the other orphanage children to the palace, coinciding with the Duke's return. Since they are Amelia's friends, the Duke would not be able to refuse the invitation. Then she would arrange a natural meeting between the Duke and Edwin, remembering from the original novel's events that once the Duke realized Edwin was his son, he brought him to live in the palace immediately. With a good relationship already existing between Lucien and Edwin, she thought that with a little support, they could grow up as loving brothers without conflicts. Although she could have kept Edwin away, she did not want to, convinced that the child had committed no wrong and that the true villain in the story was the Duke himself. With a little extra effort, she believed she could erase Lucien's ill-fated destiny and achieve happiness for everyone, so she encouraged herself to move forward with her plan. On the day of Amelia's departure, she introduced her uncle to the other children, who thanked him for being a good friend to her. The children expressed admiration for his tall stature, but soon one of them asked sadly if Amelia would leave with them and they would not see her again. Sadness took hold of Edwin, who did not want her to leave. Amelia approached him and told him she would return soon to her family's palace with her uncle. She promised him she would come to visit them often, but Edwin remained silent, struggling with his grief. Suddenly, he pushed her hands away and ran off, prompting Amelia and the others to call after him anxiously. Lucilla asked Amelia to wait with her uncle and told her she would go to check on Edwin, while the other children were consoling each other. Lucien wondered about his aunt's sudden destination and followed her steps. Lucien found Edwin hiding alone, overcome with sadness over Amelia's departure, wondering if he was selfish for feeling this. Lucilla found Edwin and reassured him that his feeling was natural, but she was happy for him because he found his family, and he in turn thanked her for their reunion. Lucien, who was watching from afar, noticed his aunt's presence with Edwin, while Lucilla was admiring Edwin's maturity compared to Lucien, who she still felt was like a small child. Here, Lucilla decided that the time had come to execute her next step, so she offered Edwin to come with her to the Duke's palace next week, which hit Lucien with a massive shock. Meanwhile, the Marquis was looking for Lucilla and Lucien, wondering where they had gone. When he found Lucien standing alone, he called his name. Lucien froze in his place, possessed by the fear that his aunt would abandon him and choose Edwin instead of him. The Marquis noticed his tears and asked him tenderly why he was crying, offering to tell him what happened. The little one went silent for moments, while Lucilla in another place was suggesting to Edwin to return to Amelia, and he agreed. But she was surprised to hear Lucien's voice objecting to being called a small child, asserting that he is not, which sparked her confusion. Suddenly, Lucilla heard his voice rising and realized with concern it might be Lucien. When she arrived, she found him standing before the Marquis, so she scolded him immediately and asked him what he was doing, considering his pranks had exceeded limits, and demanded he apologize immediately. But Lucien exploded in her face, announcing his hatred for her, and accusing her that she only cares about Edwin whenever they come here, and that she intends to abandon him and adopt Edwin instead of him. Shock hit Lucilla from his accusations, and she wondered in confusion what he was talking about. She tried to calm him and talk to him, but the little one slapped her hand violently, shouting that he hates her. Then he turned and ran away down the corridor, leaving her in a state of shock and helplessness as she called his name. She stood alone, wondering in confusion and despair what she should do, for things had gone completely off the track she had planned. Soon she began to blame herself, realizing that in the midst of her focus on getting closer to Edwin since her visits to the orphanage began, she might have neglected Lucien without feeling it, which made him feel anxious all this time. She concluded that the misunderstanding that just happened regarding her invitation to Edwin was the spark that exploded all those suppressed feelings. She thought that if she brought Edwin to the palace without settling this dispute, their relationship would inevitably follow the same tragic path it followed in the original novel. The idea occurred to her to leave Edwin in the orphanage for a longer period until his relationship with Lucien improves, but she remembered that Amelia had already left, and this means Edwin would stay completely alone there. She could not hurt Edwin just to help Lucien, so she stood helpless, covering her face in despair, not knowing how to act in this complex situation. Her confusion was interrupted by the Marquise's voice, who approached her and asked if she had calmed down, then reassured her not to worry, for he had sent Edwin to be with the other children. He added with a warm smile not to worry about Lucien, explaining that his reaction was due to his deep concern for her and that he would inevitably understand the matter if she conveyed her feelings to him sincerely. But she expressed her doubt about that, describing Lucian as very stubborn and that she doesn't know if he would accept her apology after such a great misunderstanding. The Marquis disagreed with her opinion, asserting that he sees Lucian as a noble and impressive child. He followed him to the orphanage and knew how to share his toys with the other children, which is not an easy thing for a child his age. Lucilla admitted to him that he did that only to impress Amelia, but the Marquis saw the matter from a different perspective, considering Lucian a child filled with love, especially toward her, for he sees her as a very special person. Lucilla was surprised by his observation, and the Marquis confirmed to her that she does not realize how wonderful she is. Then the Marquis began to narrate to her what he witnessed on the night they arrived at the ducal palace when he went to check on her condition. He saw Lucian beside her whispering and promising her that he would stay awake all night to take care of her. He explained that Lucian had cared for her devotedly all night, noting that it is rare to find a child his age holding all this appreciation for his guardian, and for this reason, he became certain that he possesses a very tender heart. Lucilla wondered if that was just an excessive obsession with her, but the Marquis corrected the concept for her, explaining that this obsession is often called attachment, and forming such a bond is no small matter. He continued that Lucian showing such feelings means she has taught him perfectly the meaning of being loved. Lucilla was deeply moved by his words that praised her efforts, and the Marquis added that Lucian's recent behavior was likely because he believes she loves him more than anyone else. He confirmed to her with a confident smile that Lucian, who resembles his aunt in her kindness of heart, will surely understand her sincerity. Lucilla found nothing to say except to thank him gratefully for his reassuring words. She recalled in her memory how Lucian used to become quieter than anyone else before his biological father, the Duke of Bellamont, knowing that he was not loved by him. But in contrast, he would laugh and talk freely with those who accepted him, showing his true personality. She realized that what Lucian feels toward her now is not betrayal, but a childish longing for more attention, and she thought that the Marquis is the first person to acknowledge her efforts in raising him and Lucian's good qualities at the same time. She had always been worried about whether she was raising Lucian correctly, but thanks to the Marquis's words, she felt more confident in herself. Lucilla resolved to go to Lucian to convey her true feelings to him, asserting to the Marquis that she is the person who loves him most in this world. The Marquis returned the encouragement, expressing his wishes for her success and his certainty that things would go well. Lucilla set off quickly with her steps, while the Marquis watched her with calm looks, wishing in his soul if he could provide more help to that young lady. Meanwhile, Lucian was sitting alone, secluded in one of the darkened rooms, engaged in bitter crying while muttering words expressing his hatred for his aunt. The little one recalled in his imagination how his aunt always gave her attention to the other children, especially Edwin, which made him feel she didn't care about anyone but him whenever she looked at them. He remembered with sorrow what happened at that time, when she clearly asked Edwin to accompany them to the ducal palace. So he wondered in himself with fear if she wanted to adopt him, preferring him for being more mature. The little one continued his sobbing, thinking he had done his best and taken care of his aunt too, and a massive terror struck him from the idea that she would abandon him as his father did before. And his anxiety doubled when he remembered how he pushed that strange man and shouted in his face earlier, so he concluded in despair that his aunt might have started to hate him now because of that act. While he was drowning in his fears of his aunt abandoning him, his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening and steps approaching him, to raise his crying head and be surprised by Amelia's presence standing before him. Lucian jumped from his place in panic upon seeing her, while she asked him in wonder about the reason for his presence in this place. Amelia expressed her lack of understanding of what happened, but told him that everyone is looking for him now, and that it is time for him to go back. The girl noticed the redness of his eyes and asked him if he was crying, but he was confused and hurried to deny the matter, trying to hide his tears. Amelia approached him more, and with her usual insight wondered if he had quarreled with his Aunt Lucilla. She sat beside him, asking him to tell her the truth of what happened and asserting to him that she is ready to listen to him. After she listened to his story, Amelia summarized his problem, wondering if he believed his aunt preferred Edwin over him. So Lucian nodded his head in agreement while wiping his tears. Amelia smiled tenderly and told him he was wrong in his thinking, confirming to him that Lady Lucilla loves him more than anyone else, which sparked the little one's surprise. But Lucian argued with her sadly, insisting his aunt preferred Edwin, and noting that she told Edwin earlier that he was just a small child. Amelia went silent for moments thinking about the matter, then reminded him with a smile of the situation where he called them beggars, and how he offered them to come to his house to eat biscuits thinking they needed them. Shyness and confusion hit Lucian upon remembering that incident, and he began to stutter. But Amelia reassured him she didn't intend to scold him for that and asked him not to worry. She explained to him that at that time he was actually trying to form a friendship with them, but the misunderstanding is what led to her anger, noting that what is happening now with his aunt might be just a similar misunderstanding. While Lucian was trying to process her words, Amelia explained her meaning that his aunt might not have meant what he understood, and advised him to think carefully about the way she usually treats him. Lucian dove into his thoughts, contemplating her way of treating him, to remember a situation that happened only a few days ago, where memory returned him to a day he ran and caused the tea set to break by mistake, and how his aunt ran toward him panicked, not caring about what was smashed. Instead, her only concern was to reassure herself about him and make sure he wasn't hurt. He remembered how she hugged him with great relief when she made sure of his safety, to realize at that moment she was always cherishing him and fearing any harm for him. And he compared her actions and his father's actions, realizing that if she didn't love him sincerely, she wouldn't have cared for his safety, exactly as his father does, who treats him with coldness and complete neglect. Returning to the present, Amelia asked him if she was right, and he agreed with hesitation, but wondered about the reason for her inviting Edwin to their palace. Amelia answered him that the reason for that likely goes back to her, and she explained the matter to him that she would leave the orphanage soon, and since she is currently staying in their palace accompanied by her uncle, it is likely that Lady Lucilla wanted to give them a chance to say goodbye to each other properly. Amelia added that Edwin is very close to her, just as Lucian is close to her, which made the little one look at her deeply moved, his doubts having vanished. In a moment of impulse, Lucian called her name in confusion, then asked her with extreme shyness if he could call her by a friendly title, Leah. Lucian justified his sudden request enthusiastically, explaining that shortened titles are allowed only for close people, and since they have become close friends now, he wants to call her by this title. Amelia hesitated for moments before finally agreeing to his request, which sparked Lucian's surprise and joy, who didn't believe what he heard, but she conditioned him in return to promise her to reconcile with his aunt first, and only then would she allow him to call her by the title Leah. Joy flooded Lucian, so he agreed very enthusiastically, offering his thanks to her while calling her by her new title. Amelia asked him to hurry to go to Lucilla, while Lucian was flying with joy in his soul for being able to reconcile with his aunt and earn Amelia's friendship at once. Meanwhile, Lucilla was walking in the corridors looking for Lucian anxiously, wondering in confusion about the place he went to. Suddenly, Lucian ran toward her and threw himself into her arms from behind, calling her, making her jump surprised by his appearance. The Marquis and Amelia watched the scene quietly from behind the door, while Lucilla took the initiative to apologize to Lucian sincerely, admitting she should have explained things to him in advance. But he interrupted her, refusing her apology. Lucian explained with regret that he was the one who misunderstood, and apologized for his shouting in her face, confirming to her sincerely that his claim of hating her was not true at all. Lucilla was deeply moved and hugged him warmly, thanking him for his trust in her and reciprocating feelings of love, while the Marquis watched this warm embrace, suggesting to Amelia they return to their room, and she agreed enthusiastically. The Marquis wondered if his plan had already succeeded, and Amelia looked at him in wonder. Amelia recalled how her uncle whispered to her earlier that he would take charge of calming Lady Lucilla, while he taught her how to console Lucian, expecting this plan would lead to their reconciliation. Amelia looked at her uncle with eyes full of wonder and admiration, wondering in her secret about his great ability to understand the hearts of others with this depth. The Marquis smiled quietly, certain in himself that those with warm hearts must have their sincere feelings reach each other in the end. A full week later, and in the Duke of Bellamont's palace, preparations were underway. Lucilla was busy adjusting Lucian's tie and asked him to stay still, while the Marquis stood with Amelia, for the Marquis to tell the little one he is lucky because he will meet his father soon. Lucian replied with clear tension and confusion. Lucilla noticed that and realized that those present do not know the nature of the tense relationship that gathers between the Duke and his son. The little one muttered with intense fear, expressing the extent of his terror of his father. Amelia wondered in astonishment about what he was whispering. At that moment, the servants' voices rose, announcing the approach of the Duke's carriage and his arrival, finally. The Duke stepped down from his carriage amidst the servants' bowing and greetings after his tiring journey, while the Marquis, Lucilla, and the two children lined up waiting for him. The Duke passed beside Lucian with firm steps without turning to him, while the little one was trembling and looking at him with awe. Lucian tried to talk with a shaky voice, welcoming his father after a long absence, but the Duke eyed him with a cold and harsh look devoid of any fatherly feelings, and ignored him completely to direct his talk directly to the Marquis, welcoming him after a long period of not meeting, leaving Lucian in a state of shock and fear. The Duke shook the Marquis's hand, expressing his thanks and deep gratitude for the help he provided. The Marquis reciprocated the greeting and introduced his niece Amelia, who welcomed the Duke with great politeness and respect. A warm smile appeared on the Duke's face, and he praised Amelia's kindness that he heard of, expressing his happiness to meet her. Lucilla watched this scene with wonder and condemnation, wondering in herself about this harsh contradiction, where the Duke treats strangers and Amelia with all warmth, while deliberately ignoring his son standing trembling, clutching her clothes. Later, the Duke sat with the Marquis in the reception room to drink tea, and asked him if his stay in the palace was comfortable. The Marquis answered with a calm smile, confirming that everyone was kind to him and that he had a good time. Duke Bellamont expressed his happiness to the Marquis for being able to provide help, offering to meet any other needs he might request, and renewing congratulations on the occasion of finding his niece. The Marquis thanked him gratefully, but he noticed in his soul something strange. The Duke did not utter a single word about Lady Lucilla or even about his son Lucian. The Marquis wondered at this blatant neglect, for although Lucian is the sole rightful heir of the ducal family, his father deliberately marginalizes him completely. Amelia's words returned to the Marquis's memory when she told him the members of this palace do not harbor friendliness for Lady Lucilla, so he concluded that this coldness is primarily stemming from the position of the head of the family, Duke Bellamont himself. The Marquis decided not to remain silent about that, so he initiated by telling the Duke that credit for everything that happened goes back to Lady Lucilla, and without her they wouldn't have been able to find Amelia ever. The Duke stopped for a moment and repeated Lucilla's name with astonishment, as if hearing an unexpected matter. The Marquis continued his talk, explaining that Amelia was being abused in the orphanage for a long time, until Lucilla visited the place for the purpose of teaching Lucian, so she exposed the director's crimes and reported him, then took charge of caring for the children herself. The Marquis added that Amelia, after seeing Lucilla's deed, asked him to search for her, believing she is the only lady who can be trusted, and the Marquis did not stop at that, but praised the courage of Lucilla, who saved his life despite her illness, asserting to the Duke that he never met in his life a young lady who possesses a warm heart and strong determination like her, and that she deserves to be appreciated by everyone. The Duke listened to the Marquis's words quietly, while sipping his tea and settled for a brief and indifferent response. The Marquis wished at that moment if he could offer advice to the Duke to treat Lucilla and Lucian better, but realized that would be considered exceeding his boundaries at the current time. The Marquis pointed to the lateness of the hour and suggested to the Duke to take some rest after his arduous journey, so the Duke reciprocated thanks for dedicating part of his time despite not fully recovering. After the Marquis's departure, the Duke remained alone, drowning in his thoughts, wondering if Lucilla had truly performed all those noble acts. The Duke relied on a report prepared by his assistant Jillian about the orphanage operations to confirm the truth of what was said, realizing that without Lucilla's intervention, those transgressions would have remained secret for much longer. And he also remembered what reached his ears about Lucian's serious attempts to learn and study lately. Before these new data, the Duke realized he could not ignore the matter simply, and decided to summon Lucilla later to talk with her privately. The next morning, Lucilla entered the dining hall to be surprised by a scene she was not used to. The table was set with luxurious and diverse types of breakfast, making her admit to herself she never saw a table with this extravagance in the morning, and her wonder increased at the Duke's presence sitting to eat with them, he who always used to eat his meals alone. So she wondered if his presence was an honor for the presence of the Marquis and Amelia as guests. But when she looked around, she wondered not to see the Marquis on the table, and the attendance was limited to Amelia. She took the initiative to ask the girl about the reason for her uncle's absence. Amelia explained he doesn't feel well and preferred to stay to rest, which sparked Lucilla's concern, who wished him a speedy recovery. Their talk was interrupted by the Duke's call of her name, so Lucilla answered him with attention, wondering in confusion about the reason for his calling her. The Duke spoke before everyone, noting that he learned of her recent volunteering in the orphanage for the purpose of teaching Lucian, and of her efforts in bringing down the corrupt director, as well as her help to the Marquis in recovering his niece and saving his life, acknowledging that she worked hard and exerted great effort. Lucilla thanked him, stuttering, the surprise having tied her tongue. She realized that this is the first time in her life she receives praise from the Duke, and what increased her shock was that it happened publicly before a crowd of servants who began whispering in wonder. Then the Duke asked her quietly if there was something specific she desires to obtain as a reward for her efforts. Lucilla's eyes sparkled with joy. and she considered this offer a gift from heaven, for she finally found the perfect excuse to bring Edwin to the palace naturally. She asked the Duke to allow her to invite the orphanage children to the palace that day, under the pretext of holding a farewell party for Amelia, who would leave the province soon. The Duke asked her, making sure if this is all she wants as a reward. Tension took hold of her for a moment, and she wondered anxiously if her request was rejected. But the Duke agreed quietly, conditioning her one matter only, that she make sure to return the children before nightfall and before he finished his business. Joy flooded Lucilla, so she thanked the Duke warmly for his quick approval of her request. Immediately, the Duke ordered his head servant to prepare a carriage to bring the children. The servant responded to his order, while Lucilla stood wondering in confusion about the reason that drove the Duke to accept her request with this ease, and what happened to him suddenly to become this kind. In the midst of her confusion, an idea flashed in her mind when she remembered the talk that occurred between the Marquis and Duke Bellamont the previous day, which appeared as if they were discussing orphanage affairs. So she wondered if the Marquis had talked to the Duke about her, deciding to stop at his room for a moment before returning to her private room to clarify the matter from him. Lucilla walked in the hallway carrying a tray in her hand, drowning in her thoughts about how to raise the subject, realizing she couldn't ask him frankly and directly whether he helped her. Upon her arrival, she noticed that his room door was open a bit, so she requested permission quietly to enter. As soon as she peered with her head to ask him about his condition, she froze in her place and her eyes widened in shock. She was surprised to see the Marquis bare-chested while he was putting on his bandages. He turned to her, asking kindly about the reason for her coming. Lucilla's face flushed intensely, and she stuttered in her words from extreme embarrassment, while she was screaming in her soul, stunned by the Marquis's body, which appeared like a carved statue. For his part, the Marquis thanked her for her coming because he was facing difficulty in putting on his bandages. Lucilla asked him with interest if he felt better, expressing her concern for him for not attending to eat breakfast. The Marquis reassured her with a smile that he became in much better condition thanks to her, but explained he was suddenly hit by fever that morning, which prevented him from going down to eat with them. Lucilla looked at him with extreme concern and repeated the word fever in wonder. Without any thought, she approached him and placed her hands softly on his forehead and cheek to check his temperature, asserting she could feel the heat of his body, making his face flush a bit from her sudden approach. Lucilla soon processed what she just did, so she jumped retreating backward with extreme shyness, asking herself in panic what she was thinking to act with this boldness, and apologized to him with extreme confusion, justifying her act that it was just a habit she acquired from her frequent checking of Lucian's temperature. The Marquis laughed kindly and reassured her the matter doesn't bother him at all, and there's no need to apologize. But she insisted with concern that he still suffers from fever, and suggested summoning a doctor to examine him, begging him to lie on the bed first. But he refused kindly, asserting he is fine and that he already took medicine because this matter is usual for him. Lucilla was not convinced, so she grabbed a cup of water that was on the table and offered him to bring it to him as soon as he lies down. The Marquis thanked her but stopped her for a moment, and looked at her deeply and quietly, suggesting to her she take some rest as well. Lucilla's heartbeat accelerated and she misunderstood his meaning, so she wondered in internal terror about what he means by rest in his room, and stuttered while trying to find a suitable response. But the Marquis explained his meaning innocently, noting that his temperature might worsen suddenly and become dangerous. So he asked her if she didn't mind to stay beside him until he falls asleep, just to be reassured. Lucilla processed the situation and sighed with relief, asserting that his request is logical, while she was scolding herself internally for her embarrassing thoughts and imaginations. So she agreed to stay by his side, noting she would read a book while he rests in peace. The Marquis thanked her gratefully for her kindness. The Marquis lay in his bed, closing his eyes, while Lucilla sat on a nearby chair reading her book in complete silence. After a short period, the Marquis opened one of his eyes and noticed that the sound of turning pages had stopped completely. He looked at her to find her fallen into a deep sleep, so he thought to himself tenderly that she didn't get a single day of rest, and that continuous work and childcare had drained her energy completely and made her look exhausted. And he contemplated her sleeping face, feeling sorrow because a delicate and kind lady like her had lived harsh conditions and been exposed to bad treatment in this palace. The Marquis placed his hand on his chest, admitting to himself that his wounds had healed a long time ago, and that sudden fever was nothing but shyness and a flush that overcame his body when Lucilla approached him in that spontaneous way. Despite that, he smiled with satisfaction while watching her, thinking that this matter is okay, for all he aspires to now is creating opportunities like these, so his lady can get some of the rest she deserves. After some time passed, Lucilla woke up slowly and blinked her eyes in confusion, wondering about the time sleep overcame her. She looked before her to find the Marquis lying in his bed, so she smiled with reassurance, believing he is in a deep sleep now. Lucilla felt relief when she looked at him, believing his fever had finally dropped. But as soon as she turned toward the clock, panic hit her when she realized how much time had passed while she was sleeping, and that the children from the orphanage must have arrived already. At that moment, the door opened for her maid Riley to enter, calling her. The maid looked extremely disturbed and told her that a terrible thing had happened, sparking Lucilla's concern, who hurried to ask her what occurred. Riley explained that little Master Lucian had suggested to the orphanage children that they play a game of hide-and-seek together. She added that they promised Sir Jillian to stay on the third floor only, then the game began. But the problem was that they couldn't find the child Edwin anywhere, so the news fell like a thunderbolt on Lucilla. Things became more complicated when the Duke was forced to leave in a hurry to the palace. So Sir Gillian took advantage of his absence to consider the presence of commoner children in the palace unseemly and ordered their return immediately. The noise woke the Marquis from his sleep, so he got up asking anxiously what was happening. Lucilla panicked at realizing the Duke would leave, so she ordered the maid to tell all servants to join the search operation, which would start from the first floor. She set off quickly, thinking that this is her only chance to arrange a meeting between Edwin and the Duke, and that she must ensure that happens before his departure. Meanwhile, in the Duke's dressing room on the second floor, two maids were looking for the child. Quickly, fearing Sir Gillian would scold them, Edwin was hiding nearby, feeling guilty because he caused all these troubles for everyone. Realizing he didn't mean to break the rule of staying on the third floor, he remembered how Lady Lucilla invited him to the Duke of Bellamont's palace, and how joy flooded him because he would finally be able to see Amelia, who stayed there. But when he saw her very close to Lucian during their absence, he realized he was the only one who was excluded, and he felt the presence of a barrier separating them, for he is just a commoner who cannot cross it, while they eat unfamiliar sweets with complete ease. And he wished in his soul if he was born and raised in a place like this, he could have helped find Amelia's uncle, and would have been able to stand with confidence and height before anyone. And instead of feeling the desire to compete with Lucian, he wouldn't have pushed himself to hide in. This place, for all he wished, was to have a family too. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of steps approaching the wardrobe he hides inside. While the wardrobe door began to open, terror possessed him, realizing he couldn't even flee. He was surprised when he found who opens the door while shouting that he had finally found him. It was Lucian, making Edwin hit with astonishment while calling his name. Lucian wondered in surprise about the reason for his presence in this place. Edwin replied with a question about how Lucian found him. Lucian explained simply that he had to find him because he is the seeker in the game, but more importantly, he asked him to come out quickly because he would be scolded because of him. Lucian scolded him, reminding him he had told him several times not to go down below the third floor, so Edwin apologized immediately. Lucian thought that Edwin's hiding in his father's room specifically would make the already embarrassing situation even worse. Suddenly, Edwin started crying, frightening Lucian, who asked him in confusion about the reason, and hurried to apologize if he was the one who angered him, begging him not to cry. Edwin explained while sobbing that the matter doesn't concern Lucian, but because with the end of the game, he will have to return to the orphanage, and he doesn't want to go. Lucian was moved, seeing Edwin, who confessed to him he feels extremely lonely and miserable when he is in the orphanage, and continued his talk expressing his desire to live in a wonderful house like this, and his envy for the soft bed, clean clothes, and delicious snacks. But most importantly, he wished crying if he had a family that loves him too, just like Lucian. And with a desperate tone, Edwin asked Lucian if he could live with him here, making Lucian hit with a massive shock. Lucian tried to evade the situation, explaining he wasn't adopted into their family, but Edwin begged him to ask just once. So Lucian stood confused between pity for his state and fear that he would steal his aunt's attention from him. And with hesitation, Lucian tried to convince him that living in the palace is not as easy as it seems. He recalled how his aunt, despite her love for him, scolds him every day to eat his vegetables and finish reading his books, and how his father always pretends he doesn't know him, and concluded that having a family is not the wonderful thing he imagines. But Edwin replied simply that this means they love him, so Lucian realized his attempt didn't convince him at all. A new idea flashed in his mind. He agreed reluctantly that Edwin lives with them, but with one condition, which is that he obtains direct permission from his father. Edwin was surprised at this request, so Lucian explained to him his father is the owner of the house and his approval is necessary, warning him that his father is very scary. Despite that, Edwin agreed to the attempt, considering that better than returning to the orphanage, so Lucian urged him to hurry to go to him now, and told him his father is about to go out, and that if they don't catch up with him, they won't know when he will return. And in his soul, Lucian believed his father would never adopt Edwin. and that this would solve the problem without him being the wrong one. But as soon as they came out of the room, he was surprised by the Duke standing directly before them, which hit Lucian with terror. His father scolded him sternly, wondering about the reason for his presence in his room, which he forbade him from entering. Lucian was confused and stuttered in his words, unable to justify the situation. Lucian stepped forward, trying to explain he was playing with a friend who came visiting. But Edwin's red eyes caught the Duke's attention, so he asked him if he was Amelia's friend from the orphanage. Edwin replied that his name is Edwin. Then the Duke asked him about his birthday and age. He told him he is 7 years old and born in December. The Duke started to connect the threads, noticing his age is close to Lucian's age, and that his hair and eyes resemble hers. And when he asked him about his parents, Edwin explained he knows nothing about his father, but lived with his mother until age 5 before she died of illness, and revealed that his mother's name is Iris. Upon hearing this name, the Duke was hit by a violent shock. He knelt on his knee and held Edwin's shoulders, asking him with emotion if his name is truly Edwin. Lucian stood watching his father in amazement, for he never saw him with this expression before. The Duke looked at Edwin and told him he had caught his attention since the first moment, announcing that he is the son he and Iris conceived. Lucian swayed in his place, shock having hit him, while repeating in confusion the phrase, "my beloved son," that his father just uttered, realizing that the Duke announced that he has long missed Edwin. Meanwhile, Lucilla was searching in the corridors, wondering anxiously about where Lucian went after Edwin disappeared. She soon glimpsed him coming out of the Duke's office, so astonishment took hold of her while wondering about the reason a child who fears his father to this extent comes out of that place specifically. She approached him and asked him about the reason for his standing in a state of wonder. Lucian ran toward her immediately and threw himself into her arms, telling her his father acts strangely, as if he were a completely different person. Confusion hit Lucilla as she asked him what he means by his talk. She realized after that the Duke and Edwin had met indeed. Lucian held her dress and told her he feels a strange feeling, for when he sees his father and Edwin smiling at each other, he feels he must smile and be happy too, but he doesn't feel happy at all, and wondered sadly if he was a bad child, and that this is the reason that makes his father love Edwin, whom he just met, more than him. Lucilla realized at that moment that everything that happened is her fault, for she completely overlooked the amount of pain Lucian might feel. No matter how distant his father was, he remains his father. She hugged him tightly, asserting to him what he thinks is not correct, and that she knows more than anyone else he possesses a kind heart, and promised him as she hugged him tenderly that whatever difficulties they might face in the future, she will stay by his side and protect him for the rest of his life, so he doesn't feel this hurt again. With Edwin coming to the palace, Lucilla realized that the true beginning of the story has started now, and resolved that she will grant Lucian a bright future. In that evening, and before all who were in the palace, the Duke announced that Edwin is his long-lost biological son from Iris, and that he will stay with them from now on, ordering everyone to serve him with special attention. The servants started whispering, remembering that Iris was the Duke's former mistress, and commenting that despite Edwin being an illegitimate son, his status is much better than Master Lucian's status, whom his father ignores. The maids wondered among themselves which side they should stand on now. While they were feeling sorry for poor Master Lucian, Lucilla listened to their whispers with anger, denouncing how these people, who never welcomed her and Lucian one day, dare to utter such things publicly. Anxiety took hold of her, and she wondered if Lucian was okay. As she expected, the little one was not in a good state at all. She feared Lucian would end up completely hating Edwin, just as happened in the original story. Later, and after she finished reading the bedtime story for Lucian, the little one asked her. He understood that he and Edwin have the same father, but their mothers are different, and wondered if that means they are biological brothers. Lucilla found difficulty in explaining complex matters like political marriage or illegitimate children to a small child, so she settled for confirming they are indeed biological brothers. Lucian confessed as he hugged his doll that he was worried lately that his aunt would be taken from him, but added that many happy things happened too. He became a friend to Amelia, and Edwin found his father, and they all became one family. And since family is a good thing, he decided to accept the matter. Lucilla was deeply moved until she almost cried, astonished that Lucian possesses such deep thoughts. She asked kindly if he feels uncomfortable toward Edwin or hates him. The little one denied that, and confessed he feels jealous because his father pampers Edwin, but he sees that Edwin is a kinder child than him, so he will try to work harder too, and concluded his talk that as long as his aunt loves him, he is fine, making Lucilla overflow with emotions as she whispered his name. Lucian confidently asserted that his Aunt Lucilla would always stay with him, and wondered if she was always on his side. At these words, Lucilla was overcome with powerful emotions and embraced him tightly, expressing her amazement at his sudden maturity. However, he objected with childish playfulness, insisting that he is not a bean, but rather older than Amelia and Edwin. Lucilla showed immense pride in him, thinking about how precious this wonderful and deep-thinking child is, and how he had suddenly matured. She suggested that they go together to greet Edwin the next day, and the little one enthusiastically agreed. Meanwhile, the Marquise and Amelia were watching the situation from behind the door. The Marquise thought he had come expecting to find Lucien sad but had mistimed it, while Amelia felt relieved by the little one's acceptance of the matter without issues. Nevertheless, she was still shocked by the fact that Edwin and Lucien are blood brothers, so Amelia cleverly encouraged him to take advantage of this opportunity to earn some points and do his best. The Marquis did not understand what she meant. She explained to him that women tend to lean toward those who stand by them in difficult times, and that Lady Lucilla must be going through a tough time now. The Marquise wondered in surprise about the source of her knowledge of such matters, and she told him she had been reading romance books for his sake recently, then asked him to return to discuss their next plan. She suggested that he invite her for a picnic the next day if the weather was beautiful. The Marquis was moved by her words, thinking about how cruel it is for a kind and warm lady like her to have to endure all these hardships. He wondered if it was truly right for them to remain in a place like this. The Marquis resolved that he must somehow convince the young lady. The following day, the Duke summoned Lucilla to his office, expressing his desire to show his gratitude to her. He admitted that if it weren't for her, he would have lived his whole life without knowing of Edwin's existence, and without knowing of the ill treatment he was subjected to at the orphanage. Then he offered for her to ask for anything she wanted, vowing that he would fulfill it for her no matter what. She looked at him, thinking to herself that he is an utterly selfish and arrogant human being. Because of him, her sister, Lucien, and even Edwin had suffered, and she asserted to herself that she wanted nothing from a person like him. However, she told him she had only one wish, which is that he not forget that Lucien is also his precious son, just like Edwin. His eyes narrowed, and he asked sharply what she meant by her words. She explained that she realized very well how much Edwin is worth to him now, and for that exact reason, she is saying this. She reminded him that Lucien is also a son for whom he bears full responsibility, asking him not to discriminate between the two children. After that, she announced she would take her leave. She thought about how pathetic he is because he didn't utter even a word of agreement after hearing all she had said. As she walked in the hallway, she decided to check on Edwin before breakfast, realizing that he must be feeling a lot of confusion and that she had to plan how to make the two children get along. Her thoughts were interrupted by Edwin's voice as he ran toward her, calling her Sister Lucilla. She welcomed him warmly, telling him she was on her way to see him. He returned the greeting shyly and said he had something to say, so she asked him what it was. He bowed deeply, thanking her with heart and soul. He explained, his eyes sparkling with tears, that his wish was always to have a family, and that if it weren't for her and Lucien, he would never have met his father. Lucilla expressed her immense happiness for him. She felt satisfied to see Lucien and Edwin, unlike their wretched father, being such kind children, believing that at this rate they would be able to live together as true brothers. But she was aware that external forces would soon try to separate them and incite them to compete for the position of heir. So she resolved not to allow things to go as they desired, and not to be lax in her caution. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voices of Marquis Claude and Amelia calling her. They gave her a morning greeting with a smile. She returned the greeting, while Edwin, who was following them, noticed the Marquis's presence and welcomed him by calling him Brother Claude. The Marquis asked her if she had some time that evening, and she agreed, wondering what it was about. He explained to her that the weather was very beautiful, and that he was hoping to take her on a picnic if she accepted his invitation. Later, while the children were romping, Amelia proudly announced that she had finally finished making her cake and asked them for their opinion. Lucien and Edwin were stunned by its shape, so she told them it was Amelia's special mud cake. Lucien thanked her enthusiastically, while Edwin commented that it looked delicious. Lucilla sat with the Marquise watching the children's harmony and expressed her happiness at their decision to go on this picnic together. She asked him how he was. He thanked her for her care for him, asserting that he is recovering well. She expressed surprise at the speed of his recovery, so he explained to her that he is the commander of the Knights and that physical strength is his specialty. Lucilla suddenly remembered his muscular body and thought that she had forgotten he is the commander of the Knights and that this explains his high physical fitness. He in turn asked her how she was, so she reassured him she was fine and apologized for her fainting that day. But he told her that more important than that is another matter. He noticed that Duke Bellamont neglects Lucien somewhat, and now after the sudden appearance of another son, he felt worried that she might feel some distress because she is the one who takes it upon herself to raise Lucien. She answered him that she is fine and that, children are innocent regardless of the circumstances. She added that every child deserves to live happily, and that if she ignored Edwin's pain just because she loves Lucian, she would be a shameful adult who has no right to guide Lucian to the correct path, and that helping the children to get along together is the best she can do as an adult in her current position. The Marquis smiled, commenting that she is indeed a wonderful adult, and she thanked him shyly. He added that as Amelia's guardian, he would like to ask for her advice often, and she answered him humbly that she still needs to learn a lot. Their talk was interrupted by the arrival of a servant who informed her that the Duke was looking for the young master Edwin. Edwin was surprised by that, so the servant asked him to follow him. Edwin agreed while thinking about how happy he was because he was finally able to play with everyone. Lucian and Amelia called him, promising him they would wait for him to play house together later, and asked him to hurry back. Edwin waved goodbye to them, promising them he would return. Edwin walked with quiet steps in the spacious corridors, thinking of the strange contrast he felt. At first, everything here seemed grand and wonderful to him, but now he has started to feel the coldness and strangeness of the place. On his way, whispers of some servants reached his ears. They were talking about him, wondering if this was the young master named Edwin, making him flinch slightly, affected by their talk. The maids continued their talk, expressing their pity for young Master Lucian, and wondering in confusion about the fate that awaits him and Lady Lucilla after the recent developments. Edwin remained silent and walked with his head bowed, until he reached his destination where the doors were opened and the arrival of young Master Edwin was announced to the Duke. Edwin entered the room to find himself surrounded by a number of nobles who had gathered around the Duke, and heard one of them praising him, saying he possesses sharp looks that make him an ideal heir for the Bellamont family, unlike someone else, which the Duke listened to with features shrouded in gloom. The nobles began to introduce themselves to the child one by one. Count Henry Lessamine spoke about budget affairs, while Alex Hennon also introduced himself, making Edwin retreat a bit from the intense tension. The little one was confused and stuttered in his response, admitting to himself that he feels extreme fear from the presence of all these strange adults around him. The Duke noticed the child's discomfort and intervened firmly, raising his hand to stop them, noting that the child seemed shocked, and asked them to postpone these introductions for later, ordering everyone to leave the room for a while. The nobles complied with the Duke's order immediately, promising to officially greet the young master at a later time, then left the room, leaving Edwin alone with his father. The Duke turned toward Edwin and asked him with interest if he had faced any inconvenience during his stay in the palace, expressing his concern that there might be someone mistreating him. Edwin hurried to deny that, asserting that everyone treats him with great kindness, specifically mentioning Lady Lucilla and Lucian, who take care of him very well. Features of doubt appeared on the Duke's face upon hearing their names, and he asked Edwin to be honest with him, wondering if Lucilla was the one who coached him to say that. Edwin wondered at his father's persistence and repeated questioning despite his assertion that he felt no inconvenience, wondering to himself about the reason for this doubt. The little one compared in his mind between Lady Lucilla and his father, the Duke. Despite both being nobles, he feels suffocated and tense in his father's presence, unlike the comfort he finds with Lucilla. The Duke offered Edwin a new suggestion, that he accompany him to the capital if he feels uncomfortable staying with Lucilla and Lucian. Edwin was surprised by the offer and inquired if he would go alone without them, so the Duke confirmed they would remain in the palace, encouraging him that the capital is a place where he will learn and see many new things. Edwin tightened his hands while contemplating the offer, admitting to himself that the capital is a place he has long read about in books and was longing to visit. But despite that, he rejected the offer politely and thanked his father, preferring to stay in the palace for a longer period. Edwin justified his decision to himself by the presence of Amelia and Lady Lucilla, in addition to his sincere desire to get closer to his brother Lucian. Edwin smiled kindly and told his father he wanted to spend more time with the people who became his family, asserting to him that they would all wait for his return together in the palace. Something of a surprise appeared on the Duke, but he surrendered to his son's decision, noting that he was worried needlessly and promised to respect his wish. The Duke asked Edwin to return to his room where the private tutor he appointed for him was waiting, so the little one was happy thinking Amelia and Lucian were waiting for him as well. Elsewhere in the palace, Marquis Claude was walking beside Lucilla, informing her that he had received an urgent message from the Imperial Palace, suggesting the reason might be their knowledge of him finding Amelia, and apologized to her for having to end their picnic suddenly. Lucilla smiled gracefully and reassured him that it was okay, noting that they could go on a picnic any other time, which pleased the Marquis, who considered her words proof of her heart opening to him and hope for a future picnic that gathers them. Suddenly, the doors opened for a knight to enter, performing a military salute to Marquis Claude, carrying in his hands an ornate box. The knight apologized for interrupting the Marquise's leave, so Claude quietly inquired about the nature of the matter and the intent of his imperial majesty. The knight stepped forward, offering the box to the Marquis, noting that this is the reason. And as soon as Claude's eyes fell on the box, he realized what it was. Lucilla hurried to cover her nose with her hand, features of shock appearing on her, and asked the Marquis about the source of that foul smell emanating from the box. The knight wondered at their reaction, asserting that he did not smell any strange odor during the entire period of carrying the box, while Lucilla wondered in confusion and amazement how he could not smell an odor of such hideousness that she had never encountered before. The Marquis maintained his seriousness and decided to check the content of the box himself, and as soon as he opened it slightly, a mysterious purple aura began to leak from inside. The Marquis' suspicions were confirmed as soon as he took a scrutinizing look at the content of the box, as he immediately realized that the radiant crystal stone surrounded by a dark aura was nothing but a core belonging to one of the monsters. No sooner had Lucilla's eyes fallen on that thing lying inside the box than shock took hold of her, and she took the initiative to ask the Marquise in panic whether that aura emanating from it was what is known as demonic energy, which sparked his intense surprise at her deduction. The Marquis stared at her intently and seriously, wondering to himself how a lady like her was able to know and distinguish demonic energy, especially since the possession of information about this complex matter by common of tension and confusion marking her face. His deep thinking led him to seriously doubt whether she possessed some kind of special and unique abilities that no one knows about.